this regular meeting of the Police Commission. Today is Wednesday, April 24th, 2019. Ms. Lee, if you could pass the roll.
Allenby, right here. Commissioner Matthews is absent. Nickerton, Perez-Velez.
Here.
Pritchett. Commissioner Ramsey has an excuse absent. Roberts.
Here.
And we have, temporary Commissioner Mary Kay Lacy for the calendar. Yes.
Okay. Also, want to let the record show that also, in addition to the quorum, is present Captain Lee, the PRC officer. From the Berkeley Police Department is Chief Andy Greenwood, Lieutenant Dave Lindenow, I always say that correctly. Captain Enrico, today you put the first in, Enrico Olieri, so I'll have to say the right way. Sergeant Cesar Meledo, Sergeant Byron White, which I have not seen in a very long time. He disappeared. He disappeared.
He's over there now.
Which we have not seen in a long time, and we welcome his presence, as well as Officer Chris Wage. So right now, I will entertain, if there are no questions or any movement in terms of the items on the agenda, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as it stands.
Chair, I think we had discussed moving 11A to after 9. Sort of follows up on the presentation.
Oh, I see, 11A to, does anyone have any objections to moving item 11A after item 9? Seeing as there's none. If there not, huh?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you have any concerns in moving item 11A after item 9? No? So since there are no other concerns, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes with that change. Moved by Commissioner Mickelton, seconded by Commissioner Allenby. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And let's see if there are no abstentions. From the minutes? No, on the agenda. So
Oh, yeah, no.
you're down on the agenda, but not the minutes.
Yeah.
Let's check the record show that Mr. Roberts is down with the agenda, but not the minutes. That's when we get there. Okay, so is there any public comment at this time? Yes, sir, please.
My name is Russell Bates. I lived in Berkeley for 46 years. Essentially what I have to mention is something about mental health, and that is the 5150s that I observe frequently on the streets of Berkeley. And I notice a distinction between City of Berkeley Police and University of California Police in this situation, in that more often than not, I see the Berkeley Police calling in mental health people to either assist or they're called in by the mental health people. Whereas the Berkeley University of California Police, they seem to make that decision on their own. And the officers that are making that decision, primarily on regards, I'm thinking of Officer Aranis, number 76 of the UCPD. He shouldn't even be allowed to carry a gun, much less make a decision about people's mental health. There is something wrong with him. Now, you're going to hear a lot of different opinions tonight. And you're going to hear a lot of balderdash. And what makes it important is you pick up the true points of this presentation. And keep in mind that the police are not social workers. They're not supposed to be, they don't want to be. Social workers don't want to be police either. So there's a fine line, obviously, at times. There's other lines that are not so fine. But the mental health people seem to be the ones that need to make these decisions rather than having a bunch of armed people, depending upon where the stop they came from before and the stop they're going to next. They're going to be carrying around a bit of tension with them. And if a person is going through a mental health crisis, that tester is going to interfere with their mental health even more. So I would suggest that there be a distinct difference between the mental health department and the police department. Keep them different. They're different. Keep them different. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm here to say that this gentleman here is so correct. In the sense that you are dealing with issues not only in terms of law enforcement, but you're also dealing with a crisis in terms of people that have mental issues. It's becoming more and more real as you walk the streets. If you use services, it becomes even more obvious as in the library. I've witnessed it on many occasions. The thing that's very important to realize that there is a distinction between social work and public safety. Now I'm going to give you a case scenario, and I think that many of you will come to your own conclusion on this. Scenario: African American male, quite obviously having mental issues. Large African American male. A person who's wearing a dress. This is a real scenario too, by the way. Someone who I actually know. The very fact is that how do you deal with that African American male?
Just to note that it's only 3 minutes time per person.
I will finish,
2 more minutes.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. Okay, and don't interrupt me, please. Now, with that said, if you react in the regular law enforcement way, that is an African American male. There may be some implicit bias, and I'm sure that you've went through some of the trainings in that. How you deal with that could be a life and death particular situation. Mental health plays a very critical role. You're not trained in that. But at the same time, I think it's important to realize that there are staff members that are involved. This is a budgetary issue as well. In many cases, basically public safety ends up taking precedence over mental health workers. There's a large turnover in terms of mental health workers, by the way. The very fact is that if you were working together to be able to come up with a coordinated way in terms of budget, rather than competing, and realizing that many of the issues may be mentally health related issues, then I think you will come up with a more equitable way of being able to deal with this individual who's 6 foot tall, wearing a dress, wearing a clown nose. But I want you to be aware of that because it's important to realize that mental health is one of the major issues throughout this country. Please let me finish because that's the point.
This is part of
And
the
let me
work.
finish,
I'm
sir.
gonna
Let me
time.
finish. And
It
then
is
I will be
part-
finished
it
in
is
2
part of
minutes
my
or
job
rather than 1 minute.
to time you.
Now,
I'm
that's
gonna
enough.
use the time, but it is part of my job to time you, sir.
Okay,
So I'll
sir,
speak for the same
sir,
time.
let me
You have
finish.
1 minute and 30
Let me
seconds.
finish. Now, it's rude for you to basically interrupt when I'm trying to basically come to a conclusion. Thank you, sir. Now, with that said, I think it's important to realize that if we are on the same page, that it's important to realize that mental health and public safety can be coordinated if we work together. And there are people in this room that represent that. But again, Mr. Chair, if you would allow me to say that it's important to be able to listen and at the same time be able to recognize this is a citizen that's been here for 60 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else public comment? You have 3 minutes, and I will time it a minute at a time.
Alright, so I guess I will stick to my script.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Maria Moore, I'm the sister of Kayla Moore, and I'm pretty sure you all know who Kayla Moore is. So, I'll just get right to it. If you want change, real change, in terms of mental health response, you will include my family in this conversation. Regarding your policy changes, however, I have a feeling that this is an empty gesture as a response to bad publicity. Your own newspapers have called you out as inept and ineffective. I'm curious as to hear your response to that article. You had 6 years to get it right. Kayla was killed in 2013. After Kayla was killed, that was your chance to make real policy changes. What have we seen? Less CIT training for officers, 1 hour added to the hours of mobile crisis, and the police continue to be first responders to individuals in crisis. Then we have this unrealistic 120-day time frame regarding claims, which you intentionally delayed in the case. This PRC lied to me and my family when you said you would resolve this claim within 120 days. You had no intention of doing that. Yet you want to be seen as a legitimate body of checks and balances. However, you are biased. The purpose and mission of your commission is to protect your cops, and I must say you have done a stellar job. I had the opportunity to gain access to the files regarding Kayla's in-custody death, and my God, you dropped the ball. You failed her. Even when the results of the findings were leaked to the court, you continued to leaked to the press, you continued to do nothing to change the behavior of the cops, specifically Gwendolyn Brown. You are all props and cons of an administrative judge. We put our faith in you, but you did not make that call for her. In my heart and mind is still rational. I'm here to prevent the next death. I'm here for all the families who have mentally disabled loved ones. Kayla was fat, she was on drugs, she was poor, she was black, she was schizophrenic, and she was killed because of all those factors. Because that's all you cops saw. What the police did not know was that she was a daughter, she was a sister, she was an auntie.
1 minute.
She did not deserve to die on that floor and left exposed and covered, while she was referred to as an it. She was, and still is, an it to you. Which is why nothing of value has been done, because the next it your cops kill will receive the same treatment. For all those families who are terrified to call for mental health assistance, I completely understand because the narrative is the same. 98% of the time, loved one is in crisis, families call the police arrive, and their loved one is killed by police. Unless there are witnesses with cameras, that will always be the outcome. Every day, it's the same story. Kayla was not killed by the gun, which is why we were left with you. Like I said, I'm willing to put my feelings aside and work with this commission. I do this for all the families who are suffering. We need alternatives that do not include cops as substitutions for mental health professionals. You have people in this room who are subject matter experts. Let us in on the conversation, but in changing policy as well, and how officers respond to people in crisis. Seeking alternatives to police when a person is experiencing mental illness, unless the situation is truly life-threatening. Inviting the police into a tense situation can lead to escalation and increase the harm to the individual in distress. Learning more and more about emotional CPR training, continue to build networks of support with your community can be increased. The inadequacy of the emergency mental health system is producing lethal consequences for families across the country. You know, Kayla, her family misses her. She was a person, and I know I'm gonna go against the limit, but I have to tell this story. My dad used to meet Kayla every day. He would walk to work and she would take the bus to meet him at his job. 13 years, this was in 2013, and every day he would wave to her and he would see her on the bus and meet her there. 6 years later, he still waves to that same bus. He knows she's not there, but it makes him feel good. You need to do something. You all sat here and you lied to our family and nothing happened. Don't let this happen again. I want to be included in the conversation. I want to help so that it doesn't happen. We have such great ideas. Let's implement it, loosen the budget strings because we can make this really happen. Berkeley is an amazing city. I was born and raised here. Let's do better by our people who are mentally disabled.
I'm here primarily to identify what is happening with the crisis triage monies that were given by the state. Can't recall the exact amount, but it seems like it was something like 660-some thousand. That's not exactly the figure, perhaps a year for 3 years. I personally advocated, as well as the Mental Health Commission advocated, to get crisis triage monies to address these concerns. And I'd like to know the state of that because that money was granted by the state. And second, I'm also interested in what's happening with the suicide prevention plan because that is also a crisis issue. that is major through our community. When I was on the Mental Health Commission, I know I, as an individual, made several PRA requests and found very high numbers of suicide attempts and suicide threats in Berkeley. And we brought that forward, asking for a consultant to address suicide prevention, and we were advised that a student was going to begin studying and there was going to be a suicide prevention plan implemented in the community, and I'd like to know the status of that as I sit here today. Because it's visible to all of us. I mean, if you go around the community, I saw someone today being 5150, the police, and the paramedics seem to be handling it fine as they were taking it away. I've seen many, many situations just walking down the street, whether it's near downtown. This situation was near campus, you know, or in South Berkeley. I've seen people screaming out and that they need assistance. I haven't seen any bad behavior, but there's that's just what I've personally observed. But there's no question in my mind, nor should it be in anybody's, that there's major crisis going on throughout this community, that there needs to be increased crisis. There also needs to be a homeless outreach team that goes out after 5 o'clock, that doesn't work just business bankers hours. And thank you. So that's what I'm here to find out what's going on, what the update is.
Anyone else public comment?
Hi, Christine Schwartz. Nice to see you again. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for coming today in this very important subject matter. I am concerned about what resources are out there to address a lot of the concerns that I've seen on the streets. Not on the they're doing something wrong or they're doing too much, but rather, what is there? Why didn't they 5150 this individual? What's after the 5150? Are we able to encompass the need on the streets? Is there funding available for this? I personally think that when we answer a mental health call, that for safety reasons, for the mobile crisis team, that we need the officers there. I don't think we should take the police out of the equation. I don't think that's a smart idea at all. I think that would be a huge liability issue. But again, I'm interested in finding out, how do we answer these questions, and if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else public comment? Seeing as there's not, thank you very much. Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so I also agree with Russ and Maria, and I don't know the gentleman's name that left, but thank you both for speaking. And I also want to just know that there is alternatives that are actually in use that do effectively exclude the police. There's one example in Marin, and the way in which they exclude the police is because it's a partnership between peer workers and the Marin General Hospital. And the mental health calls go to them, they dispatch a peer worker alongside a clinician, and they're actually able to really effectively de-escalate these situations, and they have a 24-hour temporary hold in the emergency room that's been really effective and as an alternative to places like John George, which can be actually really traumatizing for people, and they end up in a worse situation when they come out than when they entered those kinds of facilities. So not only does that need like a critical examination, what's actually going on in those facilities, what care is people being connected with, but then the other side of this is that the Marin approach also, which is funded, I believe, by a state grant, it wasn't like a prescriptive model, it was actually based in Marin. They were able to really build something that was connected with the services that existed in Berkeley, and I think that some collaborative work could be done to kind of facilitate those relationships here in our city in ways that would exclude the police, because oftentimes the sheer presence of the police when people are in these situations can escalate them, because some people, especially people that have been living on the streets, have trauma that they associate with police, whether or not the police are bad intentioned or too aggressive. Just their sheer presence can really escalate people in a negative way, Whereas the approach of a peer worker, who is somebody that has personal experience with mental health crisis, can actually really effectively de-escalate these people in ways that's been proven just in our own county. So
Thank you very much.
yeah.
Anyone else want to comment? Seeing as there's none, I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of April 10th, 2019. Moved by Commissioner Allen, is there a second? Second by Commissioner Micton. I know that you are abstaining, Mr. Roberts. Ms. Lacy, do you intend to abstain?
I will vote.
Okay. That way you don't have a motion that is not going to
Yes.
pass, because I wasn't here, as well.
Chair, I also have to abstain.
Huh?
I also have to abstain.
Okay, so an abstain vote is an abstain of no, or is it abstain of no, or is it zero vote? It's a zero vote, right, Ms. Lee?
I'm sorry,
Is
I
an
didn't
abstain?
catch, so the abstainers are
Yeah,
Roberts?
no, we haven't called it yet. I'm just trying to figure out whether I have enough votes for the motion to move it forward, or that we postpone to, for the other members who are present here. An abstention vote is a vote of, it's a zero vote, right? It's not a negative, but it's just a blank vote.
Right, but you need 4 ayes.
You need 4 ayes.
It is
Okay.
possible to vote even though you weren't here.
Understood. If they read the minutes, they can vote. That's under the regulations established by the city for commissioners and minutes. So we do have.
Point of order, I read the minutes, so I'll vote.
Yeah, no obligation though. So it's just, we're just stipulating that even if you don't attend, you can read the minutes and then effectively vote. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 votes in the positive, and Commissioner Pritchard is abstaining. So 5 ayes and 1 abstention, please.
Okay, motion carried.
Okay, so moving to the chair's report, Ms. Lee, I'll let you talk a little bit more about the regional training. That way you can just put it up there on your PRC officer's report.
I was planning to.
Great. Just not to add to your own presentation. But we have administrative and also a great thing to do today. We are presenting former Commissioner Ari Yampolsky with a certificate of distinction for his participation here in the PRC. Mr. Yampolsky, I have to tell you that Commissioner Sherman, Commissioner White, was the longest serving commissioner in the city of Berkeley, who is now the vice chair of the Bar Police Oversight Board, and Commissioner Bernstein are the only 3 other commissioners that we have done this for, right? And now with Mr. Yampolsky, I think it's something that we should do all the time. So you are.
Well, I think we recognize people who generally serve 5 years, and Mr. Yampolsky was just shy of that.
Well, 4 years or 5 years, service to distinction, service to distinction. So the certificate of appreciation reads, the Berkeley Police Review Commission, PRC, commends former Commissioner Ari Yampolsky on service to the PRC, the Berkeley Police Department, BPD, the City of Berkeley, and the people of Berkeley. During his nearly 5 years in the commission, Ari participated in reviews of many BPD policies, particularly while serving on various PRC subcommittees, such as surveillance and community safety, ordinance, body worn and dash cameras, and lexical policies. In addition, Ari spent numerous evening and late night hours helping to resolve citizen complaints as a chair or member of PRC boards of inquiry. The PRC has greatly benefited from Ari's dedication, integrity, and intellect, calm and reasoned approach to addressing difficult issues, an unyielding fealty to fairness and justice, and honors him with this certificate of appreciation for his contributions and commitment to providing effective civilian oversight of law enforcement to the city of Berkeley and its residents. Presented at this PRC meeting, April 24th, 2019. So I mean, it comes from the heart. It was more than a consensus product. Here you go, sir.
Thank you.
if you care to say anything to the.
I think I said something before last time. Thank you all for, and all the commissioners here, all the commissioners who were on the commission in the last 5 years or whatever it is with a rounding error, to the PRC officer and to Byron and to the police department and all the citizens in our community who come here regularly. It has been an honor to do this. I have learned a ton. It's challenging. It's maddening in any way that, in ways that most challenging things are. But it's really, really important, and I commend the work that you all do. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a few comments. I work with a lot on these subcommittees on body camera and on the surveillance subcommittee and all that. And I think you've done a great job. We're going to miss you. You came with expertise, a good heart, balance in your vision, fairness, and wanting to do a great job for the city of Berkeley and its residents. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Harry, in conclusion, if I may say, that there were times in the PRC that we needed a voice of reason, whether it was on either extreme of the issue of the equation. You were always willing and able to navigate the middle for us. When we needed clarity, we needed balance, you gave it to us. And this commission can sometimes get really engaged in the issue at the time, and that ability to do a bird's eye view and perspective from a distance and evaluate things differently will be missed, extremely missed. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
So moving to the PRC officer's report.
Okay, still no new complaints filed since last meeting. Actually, one complaint was filed, but it was not from the aggrieved party. So we cannot accept complaints from witnesses. I do let them know that they can file complaints with internal affairs. I forgot to tell you that there is a Coloca appeal filed in the case that was heard in March. And I forgot because that was on hold, because I brought it here when the complainant requested a rehearing. So I was just holding off on announcing that. So that was the rehearing that you rejected last month. So I do want to let you know about that appeal. The Maycole Regional Conference, May 3rd. I realized I forgot to put these flyers out in the back, which I will do. And the agenda is in your packet on page 41. And there are actually a couple late additions to the agenda. One is that the facilitated discussion will be facilitated by Patrick De Jesus, who is the chair of the San Francisco Police Commission. And closing remarks will be given by our very own George Perez-Velez. So we have 125 people signed up so far. So I think we're going to hit at least 150. I think I did mention that Chief Greenwood would be serving on the panel discussing Senate Bill 1421. I'm very excited that not only do we have people from all over the Bay Area, not just review boards, existing review boards and staff, but also people from like Chico and somewhere else in one of the northern counties who are interested in starting oversight in their communities. Supervisor Hillary Ronan is actually serving on one of our panels. We have people from Pasadena and Los Angeles coming, and Sacramento, and even Denver, Seattle, and Portland. So I, as a member of the planning committee, am very excited. I think it'll be a terrific day for those who can make it. In other news,
Chief, I guess that just takes us to you, sir. The floor is yours, sir.
Good evening. I didn't bring a lot, just kind of an observation, trying to not take up time that we're going to have for our presentation here. I don't have any major developments to report. I work somewhere in several different areas, so the work goes on, and I am looking forward to the Maypole, the panel, and then facilitating discussion after or later in the afternoon with the department as well. So looking forward to that. That's it.
Question to the chief? No, any status on the vacancies?
162, I think we're looking at 4 laterals right now, and they're in the midst this week of interviewing the latest round of officer applicants. So, the processes go on. We are scheduled up with this marketing firm called Epic Recruiting. They are scheduled to come in early May for sort of a discovery day, introduce folks in the department, and get ideas together. And then they're coming for a 2 or 3 day shoot where they'll shoot video that'll be part of the building of the recruitment website and make materials. So that's out and happening.
Okay, thank you. If there are no questions, we'll move to the subcommittee report. Right now, it seems to me that both Lexipol subcommittee, the MOU companion subcommittee, and the standard approved subcommittee, since I am the chairman of 2 out of the 3, and since the chairman of the standard approved subcommittee or the originator is not here, Commissioner Ramsey, and
Chair, I did want to know, want to ask you and Commissioner Roberts if you're available on May 1st for the Lexipol subcommittee?
May 1st?
Commissioner Ramsey indicated.
May 1st is a Wednesday.
Yes.
Would that be before the police review commission meeting or?
No, that's in your office. That's a week from.
What time would it be?
You tell me.
Oh, I could meet at 5 o'clock. I have the central committee at 7 p.m. that evening.
Okay.
I could be later, 5 or something like that.
Okay,
During
I'll
the
see.
day.
I'll
So
see.
May 1st could work for us on,
It's 5 o'clock.
as long as it's 5 o'clock.
Okay. I'll get back in touch with you.
As it relates to the MOU companion subcommittee, we were still waiting on the questions that we sent to the chief. Once we get the census, we'll meet. And then, just want to get this process going, because I know we're right hitting that window. It is at the end of May, chief, for submission to city council.
My intent is to get you the responses to your questions by the end of this week or early next week.
Thank you. So once we get that, obviously, we can probably do a quick conversation with Commissioner Alavi and Commissioner Mickelson, and I can meet and just finish the work and bring it to the commission on hopefully on the next agenda, so that we can just pass it on, so we can finish that as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I ask one question? I'm trying to keep up with all
Sure.
these, and it's quite a bit. Trying to find what is the best way to keep up with what policies you're considering, or where is that all done? I'm trying to keep up with the electric, I can't remember how they say it, the tasers basically.
So no one is reviewing. Are you talking about the MOU compendium, or are you talking about the Lexipol?
How about the electrical?
So there's no Lexipol general order. Are you talking about, the department doesn't have,
They don't have tasers, but it's electric conductive devices or something like that.
so we haven't looked at that. That's not in our package. It has not been presented to us. At the subcommittee level.
The policies will be posted when they're agendized. So we started to do that.
Yeah.
And I think, I can't remember, let's see, if I have my notes to
I
tell you.
remember control devices and techniques. There was one, I'm sorry, I can't find it here.
the subcommittee yet.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to keep up with.
So we haven't even looked, so I don't even know what that looks like or what it says or what kind of device it is.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it's, it might be conducted energy device, 304. New policies for review.
okay, so I guess when we get it, we'll look at it. I mean, it's on our, it definitely is on our radar.
So I guess what I would just like to flag for the subcommittee is that I think there would be broad community interest in whether or not our police department adopts a general order related to conducted energy devices. And I would like there to be a hearing, a public hearing that allows the community to get ample notice, and I think it's I don't want it to just get kind of, be in a big bundle of policies that gets kind of yes or no.
I hear you, Commissioner Pritchard. I think there are three things. The city, the use of tasers in the city of Berkeley will have to have approval by the city council. The city council has not expressed any interest on that, in that process. The commission has never ever had a discussion on tasers. No police chief has presented to the police review commission in my 11 years here, a taser conversation. I know until the other were rumors by then, Chief Me had to do so, but that never materialized or realized. I am not aware of any conversation with anyone in the department about the possibility of a taser use implementation or inclusion as a means of a tool in the toolbox at all. So I would be as surprised as you,
Great.
and as interested as you
Great.
in knowing what that would look like, if it looks like, and if this General Order 304 coming through the pipeline is referring to a taser or a taser-like device. I mean, not only, I can tell you right now, without direction from the City Council, and without establishing a community-based forum to have a discussion about its possible use, I don't see how that would be part of our recommendations at any time.
What's number 304?
I'll put it down. I'm gonna be, it's on my
Thank you.
radar.
Thank you.
Chief, you want something about that?
Yeah, just for clarification, so, that's off my radar. They're not plans to acquire tasers for the Berkeley Police Department. That policy, is a draft about if we can request a taser for a given incident, as a calling in for, like right now we call for certain resources that we don't have. So that's what that policy would be if it comes to.
Oh,
So I would request a public hearing.
so that you know that, according to our regulations, which are still standing, in order for the Police Review Commission to have we can agendize the item on the agenda and discuss it that way. That's one process, but in order for the Police Review Commission to do a public hearing, as a public, the definition of a public hearing, we would need 50 signatures. But that doesn't mean that we cannot put it on the agenda, discuss it as an item, and then bring people here for the community to participate in that public comment. And if that much interest at that time, we were going to do that, we can probably talk about having public comment right before that item as well, in order to facilitate that the community is heard. But a public, but what you're referring to, it's a much different process. But we can certainly take this offline and discuss it. I mean, I like to see what the 304 looks like. First of all, before I say anything per se, but Chief has said it's not a taser, I haven't heard anything about that. Implementation of taser use towards the police officer in the department. But I'm interested in hearing that. As it relates to your original question, the subcommittee has not met. We had some concerns expressed by Commissioner Robert and Commissioner Pritchard as well. Those general orders have been sent back to the subcommittee for review. We're going to review them when we meet. Commissioner Roberts is out of town. Commissioner Yampolsky leaving the commission created a vacuum there. At the same time, we have on the agenda today a broader discussion of adding more responsibilities to that subcommittee as it relates to a full review to some general orders, not only in the micro, but also a little more on the micro. So we'll get there in the discussion. So the Ethical Subcommittee has not met. We are charged to look at some general orders that have been referred back to the subcommittee from the full commission. The moment that we meet, we'll evaluate those as the first priority in order for us to continue the process of reviewing these general orders and bringing forward to the full commission for a board discussion. As it relates to the subcommittee on standard of proof, I believe Ms. Lee hasn't met. Mr. Ramsey is not here, and he's the originator, so we can safely say that we are going to eagerly await until they meet and pick a chair and discuss whether timeline is in the work that they're doing. Is that right? Does anything make sense? Yes, please.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking that way, you're right. We're talking about a standard of proof subcommittee, which was generated on the last meeting, which I was not here. I understand that the charge of the subcommittee is to review the standard of proof and its variations, and particularly as it related to the existing standard of proof and other standard of proof choices, and then that will come to the commission with another recommendation in addition to the one that former Commissioner Allison Bernstein presented on her review. Ms. Lee, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you just, Ms. Lee, maybe you can elaborate? I'm not quite clear, because after Commissioner Bernstein, it felt like that issue had been considered, and so I'm curious what your conversation was. I'm sorry, I hadn't watched the videotape of the meeting from last week.
You were not here, neither was I.
So I'm just curious, what is the additional, what was it that the commission thought was necessary enough to create a new subcommittee about?
Commissioner Ramsey felt that there might be additional research that could be done. He acknowledged Commissioner Bernstein's memo, so I understand on one hand the sense that there was not much more to do. On the other hand, majority of the commission voted last meeting to establish a subcommittee.
So the question that I have, which I haven't asked, who was appointed to that subcommittee?
Commissioners Ramsey, Mickelton, and Calavita.
Okay, I was not aware of that. I didn't ask the question either, so that
Okay.
in our conversation. Ramsey, Calavita, and Mickelton were appointed to it.
Yeah, the list of subcommittees is on page 13.
Thank you. So I guess Mr. Ramsey, the legend dies in
Since
meeting.
he's not here this week, yeah, nothing has been said. And Commissioner Calavita is also out of town, at least today, so I'm holding on, I'm waiting for people to be back.
Commissioner Pritchett, I do share with you the concerns about why it is necessary. The commissioner voted to have it, so I'm going to, I'll be more than interested in knowing what product they're gonna come up with. I thought it was like they use the Supreme Court stare decisis as a means to recommendation from this subcommittee going to City Council and the union. Okay, if there's nothing further, any other questions on the subcommittees? Seeing as there's none, we'd like to move to item number 9, presentation of city response to mental health emergencies by the City Mental Health Division and Police Department. I'm the chair of the Mental Health Commission. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to doing this for us. As you can see, there is quite a lot of, there's some community interest in this. My interest as a chair and some of the members is to be educated in what is the intersection between the police department and mental health, how does it work, what are the results, what is the process? That way we can get a better understanding of if there's any policy change, any policy recommendations, or just overall for us to get an understanding of how it works.
Just to check, can everybody hear? I see
Not
everybody's in the back, and I'm wondering if you're able to hear.
Oh, I can talk louder.
If you like, so I'm afraid our presenters are all faced this way. So I'm wondering if folks want to come closer, or if we could adjust and accommodate people so they actually could hear what's happening.
Yeah, so if you're sitting in the back and you cannot hear, my recommendation would be to move a little more forward so you can have a little a closer seat over here. I mean, it's easy for me to speak louder. I just have trained myself not to do so. But I'll reiterate what I just said right now, just in case no one heard me. I'm welcoming the panelists in the presentation. And I said that as it relates to some members of the commission, we're here to be educated, to hear the information on how the protection is in the police department and the Department of Mental Health. Chief, you have something?
No, I just add that in speaking with Officer Wade, who's presenting for us today, Officer Chris Wade, I just wanted to share with the commission that I framed it also as just like include the workaday. Like how do we work? How do we get the call? How do we end up being involved in the first place? So just understand that's sort of the beginning context of how the police come into contact with folks in those incidents, what those calls are like. If he has any questions that the commission referred to, and I'm sure during the course of the presentation, the other answers that to those questions and so forth. So with that, I would turn it over to the panel. And Chris, maybe you introduce yourself.
The floor belongs to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Again, my name is Chris Wade. I've been with the Berkeley Police Department for coming up about 16 years. Of that time, I spent a majority of my time on patrol, either on bike patrol or in the South Campus area. I have been through the 36-hour CIT school as well as all the in-house departmental CIT training that we've had. I worked quite a bit with mobile crisis when I was on the street. And so we were presented, do you guys all have these questions that were presented to us?
Yes, and
Yes.
could you just tell me what the acronym is you just used,
CIT, Crisis Intervention Training. It is basically the catch-all for anybody in crisis. And because somebody in crisis could be in that state for myriad reasons. It could be psychological, it could be drug induced, it could be medically induced, if they're diabetic. So not just because somebody in crisis doesn't necessarily mean that they have psychological issues in regards to how we are trained as police officers. It just means that at that moment, they need some intervention, whether it be law enforcement or mobile crisis. My intent with this, the questions kind of do a nice chronological of how things go, but there are some cases where I think there might be some benefit in terms of jumping around. That way we have the opportunity, because some of the questions later on were kind of questions that you guys might want to have answers to beforehand, so you have an idea of what we're looking at. Specifically what the chief was referring to is, how do we get these calls? How does law enforcement come into contact with people in crisis? So I'll be jumping around. Tenley, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, excuse me. I'd like to take a second before we kind of delve into this. I think the chair of the Mental Health Commission would like to say a couple things about partnering, and then I want to say a couple things before we kind of go into the specifics of the mobile crisis team. So, Puna, if you'd like to.
Yeah, thank you for asking us to come and not just enlighten you, but enlighten ourselves as well, because listening to both our staff people here, I think will bring a great deal of information and maybe even address some of the ideas that we might have about how they work and compare it to actually what goes down on the street. And time for all of you to be able to ask questions. What I did when I got the request to show up, when I got the agenda, it said presentation, but I knew I was showing up. I sent all the questions to all of the commissioners so they would be aware that this process is happening. The commission more and more is positioning itself to be extremely transparent and accountable, and beginning to work more and more closely with the department so that we're walking alongside and are honest enough with each other when we see things that we think could be done better or done differently. I think this is a great opportunity and the right moment for the two commissions to come together and start doing some work jointly. There is always room for innovation. There's always room for new ideas, for alternative methods to be used, so our people who are in the streets or in the homes living with a mental illness get the very best from not just these two departments, but all the other departments that are also related to providing good care for our folks in the community. We do have a work plan that is posted on the city's website. We have just finished our annual report, which kind of lays out the direction we're going to go in for the next 2 years. So there are no surprises for the department and no surprises for the council. It's very clearly laid out in terms of our priorities and also sort of the path that we're going to follow. This is my just early time in the second year to be chair of the commission, and I would like to share that we're beginning to make some inroads in terms of what was very interesting was that when I read the questions, they're very much the same questions that our commission also has and asks of our department, and have been getting the kind of response that we didn't think was possible. And I think that's coming out of this desire to work in very, very close partnership with our staff and with the director of the division. Thank you. We look forward to working with you.
And I'm going to introduce myself and then talk a little bit about the mobile crisis team and its relationship to the larger system of care, and then the relationship of our larger system of care to Alameda County, which I think is important as you understand the role of the mobile crisis team specifically. So my name's Groinic-Mclurg. I am the mental health division director. I've been in this position for about a little more than 5 years. I'm a resident of Berkeley. My son goes to public schools in Berkeley. And introducing myself, I'm going to say a few things that I always do in public settings. I grew up in a family that was severely impacted by mental health issues. I married into a family that has been severely impacted by mental health issues. My father-in-law committed suicide about 7 years ago. My experience throughout my life as a family member has taught me a lot about humility and about the difficulty in helping folks, even those that you really love. I also, growing up, I was homeless for a period as a teenager, and throughout my life, and I imagine through the rest of my life, I've dealt with and will deal with depression, sometimes with medication, sometimes with not. The reason I try to introduce myself like this in public settings is because we're here talking about folks getting help for mental health. And a crisis intervention is an important intervention, but it's not care. And the main reason why folks don't get care, which can help, is stigma. And I've come to believe the reason why there's stigma is because we as people don't speak our truths of what our lives have been like and those that we love have been like. So I want to take that opportunity in framing this conversation. Now, our mobile crisis team is something that Berkeley is justly proud of. It was one of the first mobile crisis teams in California. It has been a long-term partnership between the mental health division and the police department. What it does is profoundly important. Our team in the field interacts with people on what is usually the worst day of their lives. And they aim to do that in a way that is caring, that is respectful, and that is professional, and that makes sure that that person gets to the care they need and has another day to be able to move their lives forward. That being said, it is a very small part of the Berkeley system of care. The mobile crisis team is really about helping folks out who are in crisis and making sure they stay safe, but then larger than that, trying to be part of a system that connects them to ongoing care. So a crisis event becomes the beginning of a story of recovery, not another moment in a spiral of despair. Over the last 5 years, We have built multiple programs that are really focused on making sure that when someone goes into a crisis, that that person is most likely to actually end up in the treatment that they need. Tenley Yavne, the mental health program supervisor who's going to talk about our mobile crisis team, supervises that and 3 other programs that are all connected towards accessing people into care. To give you a sense of the mobile crisis team connected to the larger system, the mobile crisis team has 4 employees. We are a division of 80. The mobile crisis team only exists in Berkeley because the city dedicates general fund towards it. It's not part of our mandated responsibilities, and we do not receive funding from the state to provide mobile crisis services. The most important thing is that when folks have a crisis and get connected, is that we connect that person to treatment. For folks who are struggling the most, have a serious mental health issue, and have major functional impairments in their lives, meaning they have difficulty with friends, difficulty with work, difficulty sometimes distinguishing in reality, don't have housing, don't have income because of their mental health issues. If they have Medicaid, we treat them ourselves. And we built and expanded our teams to be able to do that most effectively. For the vast majority of folks, that is not the case. And instead, the teams that Henley directs connects folks to a larger system of care. That's provided by Alameda County, Behavioral Health Care Services, and the mental health plan that Berkeley is part of. It's also provided by Beacon Healthcare, which provides, is the Medi-Cal insurance. And for folks who have a mental health issue but don't have major functional impairment at all, it's the health plan that provides that care. And for lots of other folks, it's through their private insurance, whether it's Medicare, whether it's through an employer. It's a very complicated system. In part because of that, we've really focused in the units that Henley works in trying to make that system simpler for people. Over 90% of the people that inquire for us about services are not going to get service at Berkeley Mental Health. Instead, our job is going to be connect them up to the right place to be able to do that. Now, Henley is going to talk from the mental health perspective about our mobile crisis team. It is a very important team that does very profound work and does it with, at a very high level, and we're justly proud of that. I do hear and have heard in the past the strong desires of some community members that folks don't have to be connected to the police department to be able to get mental health help when they're in a crisis. We did do a study, and in fact did not find other models being utilized in California that didn't do this. Many of the teams have occasions where their folks go out without police, as do we. But the standard operating procedure is similar for all the teams. That may change, and we'll learn and study from folks that are making those changes. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to folks presenting about the programs.
You gave us a list of questions. Do you want to go through the questions? How do you want to do this?
Could you state your name, please?
Sure. My name is Tenley Yavne. I'm a psychologist and a mental health program supervisor with the City of Berkeley Mental Health Division. I have been with the city since 2002, with an intern before that. So I have a strong and long attachment to Berkeley Mental Health. And I started out as a crisis worker and have been promoted several times to the point where now I'm the supervisor of the programs that cover the areas of access and crisis, which are closely related. So as Steve said, that includes the mobile crisis team, which turns 40 this year, by the way. It includes the homeless outreach and treatment team. It includes a transition outreach team, which does follow up with mobile crisis. And it includes an access component that operates out of the mental health adult clinic,
that helps people connect with services, whether through Berkeley Mental Health or elsewhere in the community. So that's me. So I wanna know, I've prepared answers to all the questions that you have. I wonder how you wanna proceed. Do you want us to read the questions? Or do you wanna have a free exchange? Because you sent us questions, I wanna make sure we answer them. Yes?
One of those probably involves an overview. Could we start there?
An overview of?
What happens when the phone rings? A citizen calls, most likely dispatch or the mobile team.
Okay.
And then what is the tree of?
Okay. I'll start and you can provide
Sure.
backup to that. So how does mobile crisis get contact? So we have two different ways you can reach mobile crisis. One is through a voicemail, and the other is via police radio. The team carries police radios, and when Berkeley Police goes out and has contact with someone who's in some kind of an emotional distress, as Chris said, it could be someone who has a bona fide diagnosis of mental health disorder, but it could also be someone who's experiencing some kind of a crisis related to something in their life. It's pretty much anybody who might benefit from support from a mental health worker. Dispatch, a police officer on the scene will contact dispatch, and dispatch contacts mobile crisis via the radio. They call for MH, which is our radio call sign, and then they tell them to report to a specific location. That's the main way that mobile crisis gets referrals. Citizens can call the non-emergency number if they want to reach mobile crisis and ask dispatch for mobile crisis, and we will return phone calls that way. So those are the two ways that go through the police department. We also have the voicemail. It's not as quick, and so if there's an immediate need for response, the best way is to use the police dispatch. But people can leave messages and mobile crisis returns the calls, usually, unless it's a very unusual day, the same day within a few hours. And then talks to the person on the phone, returns the call, tries to figure out what the problem is. If there's a need for a field response, they contact PD. So it's the reverse of the other way. They use the radio, they say to the police, will you meet us at this location? And then they go out. And once they get there, the call proceeds from there.
To me. So in terms of how the police department is contacted, usually it's a community member contacting our dispatch center either through 911 or through the non-emergency line to request police intervention on an individual. That individual may be doing nothing, maybe sitting staring at a wall, or maybe they may be actively in crisis, so the person believes that some intervention is needed. The call is not always classified as a 5150 based on the information provided by the person, the community member calling the line, because the individual might be breaking the law, breaking windows, throwing something, or the community member might provide information to the dispatch center that would lead the dispatcher to believe that actually a crime is occurring. So it wouldn't automatically be dispatched as a call for somebody in a mental health crisis. It may be called in as somebody breaking the law. So the call can also come from the individual in crisis. Like Tenley said, sometimes people call and say that they are having a really bad day, in which case that call would be classified as a welfare check. And so we would, to look at our data, it's very hard to determine how many calls for service are related to people in crisis, because there are so many different types of calls we may get. It may be something as simple as a trespassing, where somebody calls and says, there's somebody in my backyard. Well, that turns into a mental health intervention call. We don't know that as officers until we get there and we start getting some information. So once the dispatcher has all the information, they will prioritize the call for service, and they will send available officers and mobile crisis if it's quite obviously, based on the information provided by the community member, somebody in crisis, again, based on just that little bit of information that you have.
If I can, so just to be clear, so the classifications for the first original response could be a disturbance call,
Yep.
it could be a welfare call, or maybe an erratic behavior call.
or a criminal call.
Or a criminal trespassing that could then, upon examination, could turn evaluation to 5150, which will down through the mental health department. You don't respond to a 5150, that's not a call that you get, because that would be assessing what the condition would be before you assess a condition, is that correct?
Well, we do have a call type that is 5150 that dispatch can enter, and a lot of times that is based on the information provided by the community member. It would be a determination of the dispatcher based on the information provided by the community member. A lot of our dispatchers have been through crisis intervention training for dispatchers as well, so they can basically pick up on maybe some of the terminology used or the words that the community member passes on that would lead them to believe that the call is a mental health related call.
I'll reserve my questions to the end on this.
Yeah, I just had a couple on this point though. So it's the dispatcher that actually makes the call, makes the decision on whether or not the mental health team would be dispatched, no?
No.
It's not the
No.
officer at the site requesting for.
Let's jump in. So the dispatcher's job is to assess the information that the caller is given, categorize that into a call for service, and dispatch the appropriate resources. We did a quick run on all the types of calls that Mobile Crisis has been dispatched to, and there's like 60 different call for service types. So they've responded to, a battery 25 times, let alone just the ones which more often are mental health related, like a welfare check or 5150, or a call regarding like suicide ideation, whether it's the person saying, I'm feeling depressed, I'm feeling I might hurt myself, or I have a family member or friend who's in need of help, I'm concerned they're going to kill themselves. So the dispatcher takes the information the caller gives, categorizes it, identifies a call for service type, and dispatches generally PD to that. PD responds, and the officer assesses. And if it's a call where we can work with Mobile Crisis, then they call Mobile Crisis as Tim and Officer Williams said.
Right.
Does that help make sense? So dispatcher doesn't decide I'm sending. They may say it sounds like this is it. We have an MH on the air. Like a dispatcher may recognize this is going to be an MH call. We would also tender dispatch an officer. Generally, that's a safety issue. Maybe let me address that a little bit. So we have Mobile Crisis has responded to and does respond to dozens of different kinds of calls for service, which when the officer gets there, ultimately results in, hey, can I get MH here? Does that make sense?
Just one other, and that is when the call goes out to the Mobile Crisis team. I mean, who shows that? One person, two people?
So, for Mobile Crisis, we have during the day before 5 p.m. we will send one staff, sometimes two, but usually one. After 5 p.m. they respond in pairs.
After 5
p.m.
They respond in pairs.
Yeah.
to 24/7?
No, they're on, sorry, that, I should have clarified that. They're on, Mobile Crisis is on duty 365 days a year from 11:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. With 4 staff, it would be hard to staff 24/7. So during the day, when it's a little bit safer to respond singly, we send staff out on their own. And then in the evening, for safety reasons, they respond as a team.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, maybe we can, I think maybe we can finish the overview, maybe we can go through the questions. And then, finish the overview, can go through the questions, because I think what we're gonna get deep into, Chief, is that distinction between where that 5150 happens, what the response of the police department as it relates to what information we're getting, and how was that designation done. I am extremely familiar with 5150s, how they operate. I'm not into any understanding that was done at, thank you for clarifying, it's not done at that level. It has to be an examination by a police officer who is a CID training or a mental health person to designate somebody with 5150. There's paperwork involved.
I just wanted to correct, because I'm observing that there's a slight miscommunication. A 5150, which you are correctly talking about, is a specific thing that occurs, and there are certain folks who are designated to do it. the designation of a phone call as a 5150 by dispatch is not the same as doing a 5150. The two terms I think are getting mixed up here. That's the code that, if I think I understand correct, the DPD dispatch puts on calls that likely are mental health related.
Understood, but as a police oversight agency, we're looking at to see how the response of the police department is,
Yes.
if they get a 5150 designation, or if it's just a simple disturbance of violence. So that response and that evaluation at that time, on real time, is what we're concerned here. That's what we're going through here. What's the intersection between that original call? I understand 5150 is a legal designation, and that requires paperwork and requires a much different perspective. So I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't the understanding of the commission that someone on a phone on information that is medically or operational assessment is making an evaluation of someone as a 5150, which has legal repercussions and it infringes on the liberty of an individual. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Excuse me, Chair. Real quick on the whole 5150 thing, whether it be a mobile crisis worker that completes it, it's an application only. When we place somebody on when we do a 5150 hold, it's actually not a hold at the point where law enforcement or mobile crisis complete the call. We simply fill out a piece of paper that requests further examination and the possibility of that person being held for up to 72 hours. It is simply an application for a higher level of care to do a more thorough evaluation on the subject we came in contact with. Just because I complete paperwork on someone, a 5150 application, does not necessarily mean that all of the follow-on stuff is going to happen. They won't necessarily be held for 72 hours. It's just based on what my observations were at the time of contact with the person. Based on my training experience, I believe that they're in a mental health crisis and that they need a higher level of care than I can provide. I'm not a clinician. I do not have, they are a higher level of clinician, but they, I don't believe, have the capability of actually affirming a 72-hour hold for an individual.
And I understood. I wrote an article 6 years ago in which I talked about how police officers should not have the responsibility of doing 5150 designations, because I thought the city was putting too much weight on police officers to do so. This was on the internet, it was on the Examiner for quite a while. But to be clear, the moment that you trigger a 5150, whether it's just a paperwork, that sets into motion certain steps. Whether it is a 72-hour hold, as in George and someone else, you are on a gravy train. No, you're on a train that needs to be evaluated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps. So we're not discussing whether it's proper or improper. I just want to be sure that that evaluation and that designation and whatever happens after that, it's a trigger that gets things in motion. We're more concerned about how we get there, how you folks evaluate it, how the police response, how the police react to it, what are the tools that they have, what tools are we giving, what is the criteria by which people are evaluated, and when do we use those criteria so it doesn't intersect too much in uses of force or detention. So that's where us as police oversight, this is how we look at that. So maybe you finish the oversight. My apologies for interrupting at that level, and then we can go maybe through all the questions and give the answers, because I think the answers are important.
Okay, so I feel like I've already answered, sort of given a basic overview, but just to review, mobile crisis is on 7 days a week, 11:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. Unless we only have 4 staff. There are times when we're not able to keep the program staffed, but for the most part, we're on every day. We respond to all different kinds of mental health related calls, so it's not just 5150 evaluations. About half the time we go out there for some other need. It could be a variety of situations, providing family support to, where there's a difficult teenager. If there's a death, it's very frequently the case that mobile crisis gets called out to provide support to survivors while the coroner is coming and until the natural supports show up. So there are a lot of different reasons why mobile crisis might be sent out. But I think we already discussed the mechanism, how we get there, so I think we probably could go through the questions now if that's how you want to handle it.
please. Go ahead, Commissioner Pritchett.
Would you be willing to just describe a little bit more, how are mobile crisis team members trained? Like, what is their objective when they're on scene? Because I've seen it, I feel like I've seen it both ways, where sometimes, the mental health workers, tell, you know, they're sort of directing the situation. The police, you know, in some other cities kind of fall back and wait. So who's got command of the scene?
So
And that goes.
that was one of the questions. And so maybe we can just start there. What is the on-scene role of? So I'll start with a mental health perspective. Typically, mobile crisis role is to engage the person, find out what's bothering them, assess their safety, provide crisis intervention, de-escalation, support, information, referrals, try to determine if the person can be helped to stabilize and restore them to their pre-crisis life, or whether the person is not able to make a safety plan, is not safe to just be allowed to go about their business, but we need to take the more extreme step of detaining them and referring them to the hospital for further evaluation. From the mobile crisis perspective, the role of Berkeley Police is to secure the scene. They often do other things, but the most important thing from our perspective is that we are safe to do our jobs because we have the police there to look out for that. So they come in, they secure the scene, they make sure that our staff who are not armed, who are not trained to lay on hands, who have no legal right to touch anybody, can go in and do an evaluation comfortably and focus on the task at hand instead of being afraid and being at risk. Very often a lot more interchange is happening with police. Police do a lot of, some people respond to police better than the mental health worker. It really depends. It's a very free interchange and communication. But from our perspective, the most important thing the police do is make sure that it's safe for us to do our jobs, and then also have the statutory power to enforce a hold by detaining someone and making sure they get to the hospital safely, which again is not something we can do.
In law enforcement, DPD's responsibilities, what Tenley was saying, our primary responsibility is scene safety, not just for our mobile crisis workers, but for any other community members that may be around the scene. We want, and also for, if it is somebody in a mental health crisis, for that consumer. We want to make sure that they can't come to any more harm to themselves or harm anybody else. We don't want them basically getting themselves into something that they don't need to. So by doing that, we recognize obviously that they're in crisis. We do the best we can to de-escalate them, divert them if possible, and determine the best course of action for the consumer. And obviously if a law has been broken, then we have an obligation as peace officers to investigate that incident and take whatever action we would make the most sense for that set of circumstances. The follow-on question you have is who takes the lead in the beginning to handle the response? And I think we kind of touched on that already. It's always going to be the officer taking the lead to ensure that any safety issues to the public or to the consumer are not going to occur. One of our jobs as peace officers is to keep peace. So once there is no active danger to themselves or others, then if our mobile crisis team is able to build rapport with them, then obviously we're going to turn over that communication to the mobile crisis worker. But just as Tenley said, I've had many calls where the person was actually comfortable with me, I built good rapport, and at that point in time, I didn't see injecting another player, be it mobile crisis, into the circumstance because I was able to de-escalate them on my own. I was able to get them to a point where I felt safe that they were going to continue on with their day without harming themselves, harming anybody else. I gave them referrals to mobile crisis so they could seek their own follow-on treatment, or if they found themselves in crisis, again, I felt assured that they would contact us and we would take care of it.
Does that answer your question?
There was a follow-on question here that if there's a disagreement amongst the mobile crisis worker and the law enforcement, I've never found a circumstance where I've been in a disagreement with the mobile crisis worker in terms of the proper course of action for the consumer. It's always been a consensus. There have been times where we might have friction points, but through open communication, you're gonna get to a resolution. We are on the same team, and that is very recognized. Yes?
I guess I'm curious about, is it, I mean, I think there's other models that I've been sort of checking out and stuff, but I'm just curious about the question of whether or not actual services can be delivered to somebody in the street. Because what was raised to me was that taking someone against their will can be a traumatizing event. They don't wanna go. And the question was, well, if we could actually get care to people in the street, could we avoid that trauma? Could we de-escalate in that situation?
Let me respond to that. So first off, the overwhelming majority of all our mental health services are in the field. Are in the field, on the street, in people's apartments. We do very little in-clinic, in-office work with anybody that we're working with in mental health. That's the entire division. We mostly work with people where they're at. So the answer is yes, mental health services can be delivered in the street. They are every day in Berkeley. That is where a lot of the services that we are set up. We in fact have a homeless outreach and treatment team who is specifically working with unengaged homeless folks every day out in the encampments, out in the streets in terms of providing those services. They can be helpful. Many of the folks that we work with are, sometimes we're working with them, at times in crisis. And our staff are able to handle that. Other times we call in a mobile crisis response and the DPD responds. It is very different to be having a conversation with someone who you are in relationship with, who is going into crisis. The reason that's very different is because that person knows you, you know them, you understand what their behavior normally is like and how their behavior is differing now. And if you've worked with them over time, you've seen what happens when someone's behavior is rapidly changing. A mobile crisis deployment is usually a very different situation. It is somebody who is not oftentimes in service and in connection. It is not with the person who's going out and making the call, whether that's a police officer or a mental health crisis worker. We don't have good knowledge of that person's normal behavior. And it is much tougher to evaluate what is someone likely to do when they're acting in an escalated way. That is why we have staff that are specifically trained in that, in terms of doing that piece. But your larger point is the part I really want to endorse. The best thing we can be doing is by increasing our non-crisis services so that folks don't go into crisis and they don't need this type of intervention. That is the most important thing. It is the thing that we are most focused on. Expanding our system so folks get the care they need, doing a good job of connecting people to care, since most care is not provided by us, and by following up on crisis calls afterwards, so that becomes a way to connect to care. That crisis intervention, again, is so vital, but it is only a small part of the larger story that is required to keep folks from continually going into crisis.
On that point, so how's that going in terms of getting people referred and into the various areas you mentioned earlier?
It's going a lot better than
So
it used to.
I mean, what kind of results is that getting? Are they, I mean, out of 10 people, do 5 of them, get placed properly and get help, and 5 don't, or they're back on the street, or what?
So it's a really good question. I think what I could say is it's going a lot better than it used to. So we now have a system which is called open access, which means that for 4 days a week, from 8:30 to 1:30, you don't need an appointment, you don't need to do anything. You just walk into our adult clinic, and if you want to get into care, you'll be first screened, and if you're not someone who's going to get care from us, we will then immediately do our best to connect you to the right place for care, so you don't have to wait a long time or tell your story a lot of times. Or if you want to, or it seems likely that you might be getting our care, we will do an assessment with you right then and there. That same week that you walked in, your case will be assigned to your case manager, and our goal is that by that next week that you walked in, you would have your first meeting with the case manager. That model that we instituted about 4 years ago has been very effective in terms of getting folks connected into care. Developing a transitional outreach team to reach out to folks has definitely been very useful. We don't know yet what % of those folks are getting into care. And the reality is, because we are a small part of a much larger system, and most referrals are going to a much larger system, our capacity to know whether that person gets connected in the long run, I'm not sure whether we're going to have enough resources dedicated to be able to do that piece. But I certainly know we have a much better chance of that person getting into care if someone's calling them the next day and saying, hey, how did that go when you called so-and-so? Can I help you in some way? Than if we just gave someone a phone number and then left them. What we do know is for those folks that go to the hospital, that follow-up team has been doing a very good job of making sure those folks do get into care. So someone's crisis event led to them being, having a 5150, being accepted at a receiving station, and then being hospitalized after that receiving station. Those folks, we've been doing a very good job of making sure that they do get into care, whether it's with us or with somebody else. We also built a homeless outreach and treatment team that's going out in the streets. I walk around Berkeley, I live here. It is so saddening to see the inability of our community and society's ability to meet the needs of individuals that we see every day. That team has been effective. It's been able to bring a lot of folks into care. It's had very good outcomes with the folks that they've been able to connect to. So what we're doing is working. It is not sufficient. That's obvious.
If I could just have two follow-ups on that. One, so in terms of measuring outcomes, there's no way to really track that necessarily. Some things you have more knowledge about and control
Yeah,
of.
I think our
other
referrals,
things
it's hard.
You don't, right? And so there's no way to say, well, if 10 intakes, 7 people or 8 people got service somewhere, and here's what happened to them, or something like that.
Slightly different. Again, most folks we're referring out. For the people we're referring out, no, we don't have that, and I don't think we'll be able to get data. For the folks that we do actually a full assessment and we're going to treat ourselves, there we do have data on how likely that person is to stay in care.
And how would you characterize the number of repeaters you have?
The people that come back, come into an assessment, get assessed, fall out of care, come back and try again?
Recidivism, yes. Or lack of it.
I would say it's not unusual, but it's not the norm. It's not. I think that when folks connect to care, for many folks, they are able to connect in a relationship, and that relationship helps, and they're able to stay in that relationship. There are others that that's not the case for, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times of trying to build a relationship with somebody. Sometimes someone we're not the right provider for, and so we have to figure out a way to kind of get them to another provider in terms of those pieces. But for most folks, I think once they're connected to somebody, that relationship is very sustaining and helpful over time, then moving forward in their lives.
Does that include also the people that come through you or connect with you as a result of a 911 call to the police?
Absolutely.
Same.
Yeah.
Understanding that it's a mutual relationship, somebody has to engage in their own care in order for them to move them. But the question to you, officer, is it is recidivism again? I couldn't even say.
You're doing
I
as well as anybody else.
did practice it in my head. I promise you I did. Yeah. But I'm gonna use Commissioner Rich's term because that might be easier for me. The folks are continuously being seen by the police department.
Yes.
Is that a higher percentage? Is a lower percentage? The police department knows which ones there are that are always responding to. And So you folks know exactly who the people in the city of Berkeley you are usually engaging with on a regular basis, separate from the ones that are much different dynamic, who might just be transient in nature as well within the city, not necessarily residents of the city, or failure to use another word. And those ones are the ones that trigger a much different response, correct? And I don't mean in response in terms of how you respond to them, but you don't have to know how the relationship built with a person so you can interact in a different manner. You have to build a relationship with that person. This is a new entity. Someone in distress of some kind you never know anything about is in the city of Berkeley. That creates a much different dynamic.
Well, yeah, there were, I worked, certain beats for a certain amount of times. I got to know the people on my beats, especially when I was on bike patrol, because I'm more, more community engaged, like out on the street, talking to them daily. That said, I may have placed a 5150 application on the same person, say, 3 or 4 times during a period of a month based on them being in crisis at the time when I came into contact with them. That said, I don't have any access to track. Once they have been sent to a hospital for further evaluation, I don't necessarily know what the findings were, whether they received any kind of care. I mean, there have been times where we place people on 5150 applications toward the beginning of our shift, and we see them walking around by not even the end, probably before we even get done with the paperwork that we place them on the application for.
Why is that?
That's because you gotta remember, when I place somebody on the application, say they are in crisis at that moment, they are completely elevated. Maybe elevated to the point where they are provided some type of medication in the ambulance to get them from that excited state. And then they go to a hospital, be it John George, Alp Bates, or any of the other receiving hospitals that, I think those are really the only ones we have.
Those are it.
You said John George and Newman?
Alp Bates Hospital. So they go there and are seen by a medical professional and a psychiatric professional, and they determine at that time, based on the information I provided on my 5150 application and what they see in the individual, whether or not they meet the criteria for the 5150 72-hour hold. A lot of times, if they've been given some kind of medical intervention that causes them to be calmer, like some type of sedation, they won't present the same way they did when they were on the street with me. And so the LIP or the medical professional might say, I don't think there's enough here based on my contact with the individual and the information provided by the officer to uphold this 72-hour hold, and they will lift the 5150. They won't uphold it. So the person is released after they are medically cleared from the hospital, not placed on a 5150 hold. Basically, the 5150 hold disappears. In terms of follow-on, I have had a lot of success as beat cop talking to them. Hey, what happened last time I sent you to John George? What happened? And they would pass on the information. Basically, it was, they went up there, they hung out for a little while, they saw a doctor, and they left. And maybe they were prescribed medication. I would say, obviously it's none of my business, and it'd be really rude for me to say, hey, are you taking your medication? That's overstepping my boundaries. I see. But I can say, are you doing well today? And that's usually my I'll get a good feeling for whether or not they're taking their medication, on whether or not they can have a nice, cogent, coherent conversation with me. My goal as a beat cop was always to mitigate, de-escalate as best I could, and not drop the 5150s, because I found that the resources weren't available to get them follow-on care. I would instead refer them to Berkeley Mobile Crisis so that they could get follow-on caseworker, case manager, somebody that will follow on and help them. I did not have a whole lot of luck personally with certain individuals who would not necessarily be compliant with a program.
So I know you're talking, yes, Chief, please, of course.
I just kind of want to just touch on a couple points that have been made here, because I think it's important for the commission to sort of just be aware of that. Number one, an application is made for 5150, the person's taken. The stay, wherever they end up, is not 3 days. It could be as long as, but it may also be short. So I just would like the commissioners, you all, to understand that a person could get what we call 5150, which are sort of slang or term for that, person get 5150 and they may be out in a couple of hours, or 8 or 10 hours, or 2 or 3 days. So I just don't want you to think they got 5150, they went somewhere for 3 days. That's not the case. I also just want to, they sort of briefly mention, like, we don't have access to health information protected under HIPAA, and so it's a structural thing. It's there for privacy of people's medical records. You know, I'll say I'm all good with that, but it also creates a thing where the officers who are in the street we can't have conversations with mobile crisis. Like, mobile crisis cannot close the loop on our officers who are, I think, often acting on their best, making their best effort to help somebody. We don't get the feedback loop of, here's what happened on that, at all. So that's just a thing for you to be aware of. HIPAA is in great effect. It is not something to play around with. Mobile crisis and the staff there do not share information with us. And so, so the way that people find out, the way the cops find out information often is relationships. I mean, just as Steve pointed out that mobile crisis workers and in fact other staff know clients and have this relationship which helps them determine how the person's doing. Police have their own version of that. It's out on the street, but many officers are, I would say, very kind of authentically engaged with people, trying to help them. And those same sorts of things happen where they can contact somebody and understand that things are not good or they're well. So I just want to point that out, especially how long they may be evaluated, HIPAA. And then one thing that we haven't talked about, but that bears mentioning, is the effects, especially of meth use on the street.
Yeah.
So how are people acting that result in people calling the police department because it's scary, threatening, worrisome? As you walk around the streets of Berkeley, downtown, wherever, you sometimes see people who are just high, agitated, screaming, yelling. Sometimes that may be what I would say is like a straight psychological crisis. But sometimes I believe we're seeing meth addiction and its horrible effects on people, and people acting out because they are high on meth. And it's a piece of all of this, which is that officers may indeed respond, identify that the person is unable to care for their own safety or may present a danger as a result of, because when you look at what 5150 actually says, the criteria, it has to do with a person being unable to care for their own safety, unable to care for the safety of others as a result of a psychiatric condition or mental illness or intoxication. So those are the legal standards. That's the form that you fill out, the application form that Officer Wade has mentioned, that allows the officer to take him sort of into custody. Remember, they're not going to jail, but to take him into custody to be transported. So meth, the corrosive effects of meth addiction, the presence of meth on our streets is another piece of all this. It was pointed out to me by a senior sergeant who's been around for a long time that we used to arrest people for being under the influence of meth. It was 11-550 arrest, and we don't really do that. That ends up being a 5150. They may get medically sedated by BFD or whomever, so they may present their presentation may be lower to the point where they're no longer a danger themselves. This is like a meth issue or meth OD. They are now calm. They are not a danger themselves or others in the moment. They're not suicidal. There's not ideation like that. Therefore, the evaluator releases them, and they are back with us, and only a pipe away or a dose or two away from being sitting, standing, screaming, and being high from meth. So it's a gnarly piece of. I feel it's a gnarly piece of the problem. I sort of pointed out for that reason because it's got to be something that we're all thinking about, and also just sort of pointing out like a lot of a like law enforcement, pure law enforcement response could be just arresting people for being under the influence. That is something we are not currently doing, nor do I wish to do that. But I did have a sergeant point out, because we were talking about, it seems like the discussion was, why are 5150 committals increasing in Berkeley? Like they've gone up in the past few years. And this person's pointing out, like, that meth use on the street, we might be arresting them, but But nowadays, we're not arresting people for that, we're 5150. It's a non-criminal justice system response to a crisis that's occurring to somebody.
Okay, I want to move on because I want to be courteous of the fact that you folks are here, that you have a day job, and that you are here as a courtesy. And because you're here as a courtesy, we want to be able to respect that, and gratefully respect that. I have, I work in our city center, so I am more than versed of seeing the act of heroin and of meth addiction, injected meth, on a regular basis, and it's quite disastrous in the community here and in San Francisco. But you're right on HIPAA. HIPAA is one of those laws that was due as a law enforcement, as a labor law to make sure there was protection for people with HIV/AIDS and medical conditions, and has translated to much different things. I want to focus on two questions that are here and answer the question. What percentage of calls involved with your threat to the health or safety of the subject, person, or others?
What do you mean?
These are questions that we submitted.
Okay.
Is it possible to quantify what percentage of calls involved with your threat to the health or safety of the subject, person, or others? Is that possible to quantify? Or these are different questions?
Those are different questions.
They're different questions.
I don't
No,
know.
that's fine. So is it ever possible to quantify what instances in which you respond, you feel there's a threat to the mental healthcare responders, or do you have always to assume that sometimes just in case of the condition of the person in distress?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you asking how often do we believe there's a physical threat to our staff, to mental health staff when we go out there? Well, because we have police with us, we don't have to worry about that, is the short answer. In the clinic as well, we have unknown folks coming in for assessment, and most of the time that goes fine, and then every now and then things don't go so well. So we have the physical environment set up so that people can make an easy escape, and we practice a lot of safety protocols. Global crisis interventions happen in unknown circumstances in the community, in places that we really have no experience with, surrounded by community members who often are looking and filming and commenting. And so there's a lot of different reasons why we have to assume that there could be a risk every time we go out on the street. Not necessarily from the mental health consumer, although it could be that. I mean, I've been in circumstances where a person seems very calm and then all of a sudden they're like lunging at you. And if the police officer isn't standing there, sort of alertly, waiting to protect, you could easily get hurt.
Because that's the dynamic of the question the community has. It's a mental health approach by having the police officer present. And I hear what you're saying is that minimize the ability for the person to
our
participate,
experiences, we've been able
more agitated.
Yeah,
but I can see the safety aspect.
People in a mental health crisis are volatile, unpredictable, and they're unknown to us. And so from our perspective, it's rather than trying to figure out on a case-by-case basis, okay, is this gonna be okay? And then getting it wrong and having something happen. In addition to the safety of our staff, we're trying to protect the consumer who may act in a way that is not in their best interest under very adverse circumstances and commit actions that they would regret later, that will ruin their lives or the lives of people who care about them. So part of the safety concern is about the person we're assessing and making sure that they don't have the opportunity to take action when they're not in their best mind that will have lasting consequences for them. That's part of the goal of a 5150 is protect the person, and that includes, from our perspective, keeping the scene as safe as possible.
I want to say we fully understand the desire that someone would have that when they're in a mental health crisis that they would not encounter a police officer. We deeply appreciate and value the partnership we have with BPD. There is not a model that's being used by a county system widely that has an established record that does not involve this type of partnership that is in place. If there may be, people may there is new grants out, and they're piloting new things, and we all are learning. If there was a safe, viable response that did not involve the police department, I am sure the police department would be happy to not devote their resources when they didn't have to those calls. And our goal is to help the person there. And we know, again, we deeply value this partnership, but there are all kinds of reasons why folks might get, anybody might get more tense and more anxious around the police officer. Other folks might feel safer. That is not a viable model that we've been able to locate that's being used in a county system that has a track record of safety and success.
You answered, the first question was answered on what kind of responses are the responses. I mean, it's also important to know that what works in one community necessarily works in another community. So while my work in Marin or my work in Chico must really work in the city of Berkeley or San Francisco. That's important to know. I have a question related, and I'll give you the floor after this question. Because the question was asked about, so what happens when, and this is to the police department, what happens when somebody who's in distress commits a criminal act as an end result of being in distress, right? Whether it is vandalism, whether it is public urination, defecation, whether it is because of their own mental distress, just hitting a passerby, right? They push a passerby on the road walking. And I understand that, so we know we're talking about mental distress, we're talking about this issue. And we talked about, you said specifically that if there's a criminal act that's being committed, that you have to go where that leads you because breaking the law is breaking the law. Where is the balance for the police department in having a discretionary assessment?
Well, real quick, I think we can clear this.
I know, but I want the chief to listen to the question.
I
the chief is listening. Most of the questions are for you, but also are to the chief, right? I mean, and also the community to know that we're asking this question. I mean, where is this kind of an assessment for somebody to say, this might not be a drug addiction, which is what we talked about. This could be a real mental distress, a mental situation, mental health situation. What happens when that person, because of that end result, has committed what we consider a criminal act? And what is the assessment, especially the police department, and how do you divide that between saying, that might not be something we're going to put that person on their arrest or charge it to Santa Rita, or we're going to follow the path of the mental health first?
So, I mean, I'll just say there's a wide range, so it's not 100%. Officer Wade points out, if a crime is committed, that could bump us in one way or another. But generally speaking, with a serious violent crime, we are most likely, or we are going to, and I'll let Chris is closer to the field than I am in a sense, serious violent crime, that person's going to get arrested. They may go to John George. Often we get people who express thoughts of suicide, so we end up taking them to John George, and then they are, once they're released, we get the call, so once they're clear to be released, and we pick them up and to put them in, sort of in the criminal justice system. So typically you're going to find, that's what you sort of typically find. Lesser crimes, infractions, some of the things you said, misdemeanors, we're generally not interested in criminal side, and there's unlikely to be any sort of enforcement on that. But, I mean, for example, we had one incident where a person ran head on a school bus several years ago. Like, that person got 5150. There was, suicide, who knows, and or suicidal thoughts, but that would be like, okay, they're arrested, they will go to John George, and once they're cleared from that, then we would pick them up and then go to our system. That is probably a very small number of cases, but generally that's what I'd be looking for, is somebody who's really endangered others.
Commissioner McKinnon and then
I'm just kind of filling in the blanks. You gotta think of the nature of the crime. If you are talking about a serious, say, great bodily injury crime, it isn't even with us. We would put the person on a 5150 application, like the chief was saying, and they would be sent to John George or whichever receiving facility. If the 5150 was upheld, they would still stay in that facility, but then once it was lifted, whether they were fit for incarceration, then they would be released back to us and we would turn them over to the county where they would receive ongoing care, hopefully at that jail. Then it would be up to the district attorney working with whether, the victim of the crime to determine whether or not they wanted to move forward with the charges in terms of, are they gonna file charges? Is the person going to have to answer to those in court? But for street level type stuff, drinking, vandalism against maybe a city pole or something like that, I cannot even think of a circumstance where the district attorney would even consider filing charges, nor would we hold the person. There's, for any misdemeanor crime, we have the option of field citing them. If the district attorney determines that they're not gonna prefer charges, then that's pretty much the end.
So we can cite somebody out, the DA can examine the case and come back later and say we're gonna charge the case.
It was important for you folks to state it because I think that sometimes the dynamic is a discussion to then geared to something else by someone who might say, well, this person was in distress and then that person was arrested. So it is important for you folks to clearly and to say the difference between what the perspective is. So that way we have a response to the community members who might use one against the other. And now we have the answer which makes sense to me.
When someone's released from a 5150 hold from the hospital and there's no violent crime or charges, do they just walk out the door?
Mm-hmm.
So would it be possible to maybe have a service they could call where they could voluntarily connect back to mental health? That the hospital has some card or something they could give people so that there could be some voluntary follow-up with them?
So there's a lot in that. So I think we're talking about folks who are transported to the receiving station at John George, then are not deemed that they're going to be on a longer hold, so they're not hospitalized. They're released from the psychiatric emergency services at John George. Those folks do get referrals, and they get referrals to us. And I know the county has, I don't know of that particular program. It's a really interesting idea, and I will bring it to the county. I think it's an interesting idea. The county's done a lot of actually employing peers at John George in the exact manner that you are describing, which is for folks who are hospitalized in terms of connecting them to care outside of the hospital when their hospitalization ends. And similarly, we talked about building programs that we in reach into the hospital for folks that are 5150 from Berkeley. I don't know whether that kind of program is existing for psychiatric emergency services, so I will inquire from the county about that, and if it's not, I'll make the suggestion because it is a good point. It happens a lot, and there are a lot of folks who don't end up getting hospitalized but are clearly in distress, whether that distress is partly because of drugs they use, whether it's partly because of mental health, whether it's because of other things, and they're not getting the help they need if they're just cycling in and out of the psychiatric emergency services. So I'll ask that question.
Is it possible that the distribution of Measure O and P funds will be of use for some of the other, some community members mentioned some state grants and other programs? Do you have your eye set on additional resources?
Well, Measure P is going to be determined, I guess, through some combination of a special oversight group at City Council that will, I guess, in the end distribute those dollars. We've certainly, as have everybody, illuminated folks on some of our needs, and there are many needs for those dollars. We did receive, actually, a crisis triage grant. It was more like $600,000 over 3 years. And what we are doing with that money, and we're testing out, is we talked about how to reach mobile crisis team earlier. We're going to have a phone line because the grant was reduced down. They lost some of their money, so they gave us less money. It's only going to be for 5 hours a day. But for 5 hours a day, we will have a live clinician who will have the phone line. Anyone in a mental health crisis can call that line, reach a live clinician who can try and de-escalate or deal with the crisis event there, so they won't need to call the dispatch and be able to reach a mental health worker. If it turned out that there needed to be a mental health response, it would go through the same process. We would involve the dispatch, who would then send out officers, who would then call in mental health. But we're hoping that that will be able to reduce the need for that. That being said, we're relatively modest in our hopes, given that it's only going to be operating for 5 hours a day, and we only have the money to operate it for 2 full years. So by the time folks get, so we're not sure, but we're testing it out. We're evaluating it closely. We're trying to see if we learn something from it, because that could be something that could serve a need for a set of folks where if they could just talk to somebody, maybe they wouldn't need a mental health response at all at that particular moment. Maybe we could say, hey, why don't you come down to the clinic tomorrow? Or, oh, you know, you're actually connected to us. What if we call your case manager and we're able to connect you up? So we're hoping that that will help.
Commissioner Richard.
Yeah, well, that's really great to hear, because I've been trying to figure out how, just, I think it was mentioned earlier that there are people who don't feel comfortable for whatever reason, whether they have outstanding warrants or something like that, they don't want a police response. And I don't know how to refer those people.
Fair enough.
I also just want, I think it has to be said that in our city, as we all sit here, people who get, well, many of whom get a check from the city, that institutionalizing a class of homeless people is to institutionalize great, what can I say, I'm not saying everybody is mentally, has mental illness, but I'm saying, my God, I don't know how I would not if I was homeless, chronically homeless. And so I just want to prevail on everybody here at these tables to turn that back on the leaders of the city and say that that's part of the problem, that's a big part of the problem. I think we all could agree on that. But I think we should stop saying it. I also am curious about how are we evaluating? I'm curious about how is the police department evaluating the effectiveness of their interventions, and how is the mental health division tracking? You know, I'm really concerned about some of the data that's not being collected, that I fear is not being collected. And I also want to say that I'm concerned about, you know, I delivered services for people with developmental disabilities, on a wide range of developmental disabilities, and people who were violent. And we didn't always, I just want to flag the assumption that anybody who's accessing services is potentially violent. And I think that assumption discourages other people from accessing services. And I think what one of the reasons, one of my motivations for being here tonight and for trying to convene this conversation is that I think there are models out there that that don't begin at this elevated place, begin at this place. That somebody seeking services can't get services. And that if there are indications that there is a threat, then officers are called to the scene. Then additional support is called in, but that's not necessarily the starting place. And what I'm saying is that was not the starting place. I think more people might be accessing services, and then the challenge is for us is to provide those services.
So I just want to take the last question first, because I just want to clarify. The way to access services is not to call Berkeley Police and Mobile Crisis. The way to access services is the way that most people access our services.
How?
All day, any day, call our cat line, Monday through Thursday, 8:30 to 1:30, walk into our clinic 1521, just show up and we'll work with you.
And what do you get?
And so I went through that earlier. I'm not going to go through that piece again.
No, I guess what I'm saying
you
is
can
that
get connection to care or connection to a case manager at Berkeley Mental Health. That's the care that we can give you in terms of being able to provide services. Crisis is not the way to access services.
I agree.
It
See,
is.
what I'm asking is though, I think there's a synonym when referral is sometimes mistakenly called service.
So the
And
most.
so let me just finish my question. Because I'm going to tell you, on Sunday, I watched Mobile Crisis and I watched the police. I was riding my bike down the street. There's 4 police cruisers right there. There's an African-American man in handcuffs. On scene, there's a fairly significant response. The officer informed me that what had happened is that this individual had been calling 911 since 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, if that's not a call for help, I don't know what is. And he wasn't getting the help that he wanted. Mobile Crisis showed up after the officers, and she came in from a distance of about 4 or 5 feet, asked him questions like, have you eaten? You know, have you taken any kind of drugs? Have you this or that? She did an evaluation, but it was from 4 or 5 feet away. I'm just saying that if that's a style of delivering care, it doesn't resemble anything that I'm familiar with.
So again, I'm
And
missing the
let me tell you
question.
how this is resolved. At the end of the day, after 4 police cruisers, after Mobile Crisis, they said, well, we're not going to arrest him for calling 911 all those times. We're going to drive him to People's Park, where he can get services.
So I'm not sure what the question is.
I'm saying, do you take any statistics? How do you evaluate the effect? And I'm saying not referrals. You're telling me that I can, if I needed emergency mental health, that I could call the Berkeley Mobile Crisis Team.
No, that's not what I'm telling you.
Okay, I'm helping you understand, because I don't know where I can go and
So
sit
we have
down with
about 5 more
somebody.
minutes of this. These are employees of the city of Berkeley or areas.
Yeah,
Listen
no.
to us. 5 more minutes, and Commissioner Lacey has a question. 5 more minutes, and we'll move on. I mean, out of the courtesy of the time that you're giving us today.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out when we say service, what I'm saying is, do you keep statistics on how effectively people have been served? And I'm saying, how easily can I tell this homeless person who is telling me that they're having a problem, like, here we're gonna go, we're actually gonna get to talk to somebody with a short waiting period, not like tomorrow or next week.
So I think the question, do you keep statistics of that? I think that's the question.
I don't know how we keep statistics of that, but I do want to make 100% sure that you're clear, because I know you're out there working with folks, and I want to make sure you know. What you should do is walk that person down to 1521 University Avenue, our adult clinic, Monday through Thursday, 8:30 to 1:30. They'll be seeing right then.
Commissioner Lacey?
And, but, I'm sorry, and then statistics thing was, no, there's not.
I can't parse out what you're asking, exactly what I would be keeping statistics of.
How does Berkeley Mental Health evaluate their effectiveness?
That's a very large question. I'm not going to be able to answer that in 2 minutes.
Can I follow up with you later? Would you be willing to have a conversation with me about that later?
Yeah, probably not tonight, but yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
I'd be happy to sit down with you and talk to you.
Okay.
Commissioner Lacey?
Yeah, I have just 2 quick questions. One, Chief, I was wondering, you might have been asked this before, maybe it's not even something you know, but is there an estimate of how much of the police department's resources are devoted to mental health related issues? I know that's broad.
Yeah, it's broad, and several years ago, our crisis intervention coordinator at the time, Officer Shannon, I think he suggested like 1/3 of our calls for service involve some sort of mental health issue. We don't have a reliable way to measure or deliver that. I'm not saying that 1/3 is necessarily wrong, but I'm not prepared to sort of stand behind that.
Right.
I've heard that number escalate and be exaggerated, that half of all calls. The bottom line is, in police work, you're dealing with people who are sometimes in crisis, and that's part of the police work, that crisis part of dealing with folks.
Right, you don't see people at their best routinely, right? You're not getting called for that.
Sure.
Right, no, I understand that. I just wondered in terms of these calls, and that was, my second question was really, the reason I wondered about that, my second question was, I really hear that the community, and mental health workers needing to feel safe in order to go out and do your jobs. And, I think it was good that the community heard that as well from you. But I was curious about, and there was the comment about something happening in Marin, and you mentioned it. I was wondering what that was exactly, because I didn't get a note of it, and if there are others. Just really quickly, are we really looking into this in a big way, or is there just a handful, and where are we?
So there's all kinds of different kinds of crisis services, and there are all kinds of different models. I don't know the model that you were discussing in Marin, and it sounds like maybe it is being done with a triage grant. but it could be potentially for a different purpose than what we're discussing here in terms of that piece, or it could be for a segment of the population, or it could be a whole new model that they're trying out that we're going to learn from that'll become the state of the art. I do not know. What I do know is that we did do a survey of other California counties because we wanted to understand were folks using a significantly different model. Folks are not.
Okay. Well,
At this point, they are not. That doesn't mean that nobody's trying nothing, and it doesn't mean that there won't be a different model that's in place in 5 years.
Well, I appreciate that clarification because I did hear you say that, but then I thought maybe there was a program you were aware of, so it sounds like there isn't. Thanks.
But I will inquiry in Marin and find out about it.
So, I mean, we have to go on. We have used a lot of your time. To the chairman of the Mental Health Commission, thank you very much for being the voice of the city of Berkeley, the community, to the department, and to other agencies. Well, thank you for the work, because it's always important and relevant. To you folks, thank you very much for taking the time to come in here. For you all to Officer Wade, I know that it's something that you did out of educating us as part of the commission. So I personally, the commissioner as well, thanks you deeply for doing this, for giving us the information that we need so that we can move forward. Lots of notes. So I thank you so much, and Godspeed on the great work that you're supposed to do.
Will you be giving us a copy of that study that you were referencing?
If you guys request it, yes.
Okay, so let's move to item, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Item 11A. And this comes from you, Richard.
Yeah, so, I found that presentation very enlightening, and I'm interested in looking into those other models and seeing what we can learn. So I think I don't know that many people who think we've got it figured out. I feel like there's always room for improvement. And, my hope is that we might be able to hear from a range of people, invite people who have access some of these services, and see, we might ask somebody from, John George to maybe help us understand their interactions. I'm also, but I think actually, what did I say? Here I've got, there's the Crisis Prevention Institute, there's the Public Health Justice Collective, there's the American Public Health Association, there is NAMI, there are a lot of organizations actually that are sort of, whose goal is to mitigate and to lessen the trauma associated with accessing emergency mental health services. And I'd love to hear from those folks. So I'd like us to kind of set up a meeting where we could hear from those folks. We could create a speakers list or whatever and try to get around it, get a sense of the sort of flow of how these services are accessed, and see if we can. I also think it's troubling that we don't really know how we're doing. We live in a land of anecdotes, but we don't really, so maybe we need to start keeping some kind of data. Frankly, it alarms me that our assumption is that everybody who needs mental health care is potentially violent.
Yeah.
I think safety for sure, but I also think that we need to really examine how it's happening in the field. Because I can tell you that for me, I've never seen mobile crisis direct the scene. I see the officers pretty much directly in the scene. And that the public perception is that, when you call, and I have tried to access emergency mental health services, and then there was that goes, which means you're being reported. And so sometimes like, no, I didn't want a cop, because I'm scared that if a cop comes, and if my sister's acting crazy or something like that, and she's got a potato peeler in her hand, an officer would be justified in shooting her. call it what it is. So I like to reduce, and to the, just, if it's absolutely necessary to have police officers, yes, go ahead and do what you gotta do. But how do we know how care is being delivered? I go down Berkeley streets, I see a lot of people in need who are not being served.
So we have to figure this, Commissioner Fisher, if I may, we have to figure this out as an action item. I think there's an interest of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commissioners to engage in a discussion about mental health delivery to the citizens of Berkeley that is not within the purview of the Police Review Commission.
No, it's about the police involvement.
So the only purview of the Police Review Commission would be in how the police department responds and the responsibilities responds to the mental health crisis incidents. That is the only thing that's under our purview.
Yes, sir.
That's it.
Yes.
That's the only thing that's under our purview.
That's right.
I mean, but that's not to dwell independently of anything else. So I mean, if we have a concern about how the police department is responding to situations which are in crisis, and we just heard from the Department of Health that they are more than comfortable and they require and they need and they want police officers there with a 4 or 5 feet distance to the security of their employees because they don't know what's going to result. I just want to make sure that we are Commissioner Lacey, I so threw you in this boss. I'm sure I don't want to be sure that if you're not part of the boss, you're not part of the boss. That 4 of us are not necessarily convinced that dwelling into the process for mental health care is our purview.
Well, let me be clear because I feel like maybe I have not been clear enough. My concern is that too much of our police resources are being dedicated to the provision of mental health care. Too much of our police department is responding. I think if we had some process for evaluating, those officers didn't need. Did we need 4 officers to tell this guy to stop calling 911? You know, was that an effective intervention to drop him off at people's park? And I'm going to say that I've seen this more than once. And so what I'm asking is, shouldn't our city leaders know how? The police department is a $66 million operation annually. If we're saying that a third of what they do is respond to people with mental health issues, I want to know that are those the essential response, or is that sort of a generalized response? And I feel like it's become routinized to have officers be primary responders in those situations, and they may not need to be. So this first step might be to look at our data collection and see what kind of calls are we getting. Look, if they're all life-threatening emergencies, right on. But what if they're not? What if there's a better way to use our police department and a better way to deploy? And I think there's brilliant folks out there. I'd love to see his study. I don't know when it was done. But I think that, to be honest, out of respect to Maria Moore, whose sister died because of a wrong response. You can analyze it, whatever, but somebody died. That's a wrong response. And we haven't looked at emergency mental health delivery alternatives. Why not? Why not educate ourselves? Why not create a list of invitees and have them come and share how other cities are doing it? Share how other institutions, or maybe there's resources out there, like that, what is it called, the Crisis Prevention Institute. Have y'all looked into them? Because they train people how not to use violence in situations. And I haven't seen evidence that we're actually, tactical de-escalation is a whole different kettle of fish than delivering mental health services.
It's hard to respond to, Andrea, because your concern is real and it's something I think everybody sheriffs. I cite the origin as Ronald Reagan, governor, deciding that mental health care was no longer worth something investing in. The question is what's our role and how can we contribute? And what the PRC can contribute is probably more limited than what Andrew Pritchett can do, investigating and participating and collaborating with Buna and other parties. I don't, first of all, data collection on something like mental health services, I don't think is going to be meaningful, because how many times do you have to try to help somebody before you save one person? Maybe it's 100 times that you reach out to people and provide the services that you can, and you save one life. Was it worth it? Of course it is. So data collection as a way of assessing something like that doesn't feel right or like the correct impulse to me. So I'm not sure what to say. I don't think it's about us trying to become experts in mental health. I'm curious to see Buna's work plan that she mentioned, and I'm curious to know if there is any support we can offer from our narrow purview. But at this moment, I don't know what that is. I don't think it's a big sweep and trying to become the experts in something that is a lifetime of work to understand.
Commissioner Roberts.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this because, you know, I'm of the opinion in managing anything, if you don't have the data, you don't know what's going on. And if you don't know what's going on, you can't prioritize and do whatever you gotta do. That's just the way it is. And otherwise it's sort of the best information you can get, you know, hearsay or something like that.
But tell that to Robert McNamara, where data drove decisions in the Vietnam War, and it was completely wrong. Data can be totally misleading as well.
Well, I understand that. I'm not suggesting that you need bad data. You need good data, right? So
We have enough
that's
of that.
kind of a presumption.
I think you're saying to say that data can be interpreted at times in a
No,
way
I
that you
understand.
want it to be.
Not everything
But,
comes
you
down.
know, in Berkeley, I would say Berkeley is not like heavy on collecting data and acting on it. And even the department collects gazillions of pieces of information on fair and impartial policing, but nobody acts on it. And so, the bottom line is, I think it is important, the data part is important to understand just for the police side of it, not just I'm not trying to feel like we're trying to invent mental health services or anything like that. I think that's important. It's like if we ask the chief, well, you know, about how much is this, you know, he'd have a good idea or could go find data about it. So that's one thing. The other thing I'm kind of left cold with tonight is we really never got to the fact of, you know, so what are the top, you know, there's always room for improvement. What are the top 3 things in this system that need to be fixed? And how would you fix them? And how much would it cost? And is there a cost benefit there, something like that? Maybe they would say nothing, you know, everything is perfect, but I doubt it. So we never got to that. And I still don't exactly understand how many, if I ask the team there, it's gonna be my last question, it's like, well, how many times do you get called out as a result of a police call every day or every week? I still don't have a good appreciation for that. Is that 10, 20, 50? So that we would better understand the magnitude. So I think that's another piece of data. I think that, you know, I was looking at Andrea's list here on page 1. I think those are relevant questions, most of them regarding policing. You know, we might consider trying to get more information. I'm not trying to set us up, and my feeling is we shouldn't be set up to try to reinvent the wheel on mental health services. But we do need to understand how it does relate to the police department and how we can serve the community and the people on the street better.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I think my point was that how things can be improved on better in terms of mental health is not our purview. How things can be improved in terms of police interaction with mental ill people or responses to people in crisis is under our purview, not how they do their work. I think my only problem with all this is like it's so mixed together that it's mental health commission, it is the mental health department, and there's a component of police, and we're mixing it all together, and we have no purview there. I'm not interested, as a citizen of Berkeley, and somebody who's going for city council, I'm interested in how mental health commission works. Always been. I'm interested in how the mental health department works. But as the chairman of the police commission, I'm interested in how the department is functioning with the mental health department or responses to people in crisis, which is much different than what this is asking. Commissioner Lacy.
Yes, I just wanted to be clear about why I asked the questions I asked, and it was because I was looking at item 11. And also I just wanted to make sure that there was clarity, because it wasn't clear to me until I asked the question, about whether there are alternate models that people are using. And it seemed to me, if there were, that may be something that in terms of the role that it seems to me the Police Review Commission has to look at how we are dealing with mental health and how the police are involved in that. If there are other models that would free up the police officers' time in responding, that obviously would be something we would want to know. It wasn't clear to me whether there are other established models and they're out there and we just haven't started to use them or not. And my question, for at least for me, was the answer clarified that there really aren't. But I'm not saying, Commissioner Bridges, that's a fact. It's just that I think as we're trying to assess what we're doing, that was the answer. Maybe there are other models, maybe they should be looked at, but right now, I guess as I sit here, I don't know what they are and I don't know how we would get them. So I just wanted to be clear about why I asked the question.
Well then what I would ask is that can I have permission to locate them and bring them to you? Can we bring those models to you? Are you willing to consider them? Will you hear it and hear it as with the idea? I'm not trying to remake mental health services, but I am very concerned. When we took that tour of the jail, right? There's a room in there that has no toilet, that has no nothing, right? That's for somebody who maybe is agitated, escalated, right? So that's a
That's a yes.
And so that is mental health care. If somebody's in that room because they are so in such distress, that we have feels like that's our purview. We should be asking questions about that continuum of care, how it goes. If we intake them. I had a friend of mine who got punched on Shattuck Avenue by some guy. The officers came, they got the guy and they arrested him, and the woman, my friend, she was like, the guy's out of his mind. And I asked the officers, is he mentally ill? He says, yeah, but we're gonna take him to Santa Rita so he can get services. How do we separate all that out? But it's happening. And so if we're not willing to hear from people who have experienced the mental health system, and we're not willing to look at data, but we know that the police and mental health are working could be as much as a third of what they do, how can we turn away from this? How can we not? This is a policy investigation. This is a policy question. Is there a better way? Because we're also drifting towards spit hoods. And I know that Berkeley Police Officers Association wants tasers. And so otherwise, if we don't look at these alternatives, we're going to drift into a more institutionally violent approach to dealing with mental health issues in Berkeley. And again, I'm sorry, but I never met Kayla Moore, but I feel like I have. And that's with me as I sit here.
So the question is, because I want to make sure that we understand that the police department is not into giving care. The Berkeley Police Department is not healthcare givers. Because we keep saying, we're talking about healthcare. How is that care? Where is that care? I understand that if somebody is in a secluded room or somebody is in isolation, that can affect the mental health. I understand that. But if the discussion is going to be geared at having a conversation of how the Berkeley Police Department's role is in situations that have to do with people with mental health, or whether how they are the catalyst for either the criminal justice system, or to referrals to psychiatric hospitals, we can have the discussion of where we think where the work that they're doing is the work that they should do, how that should be changed. But the Berkeley Police Department is not doing mental health care. They're part of a process which involves mental health department, in which mental health department has requested their assistance for the security of their individuals and their employees. Having said that, the thing about crisis is that people that are in crisis before they're in crisis, they're in crisis under crisis, and the end result of a police involvement or a police action can create more crisis. I understand that. From a police oversight person, I understand what that is. Crisis management, it is before, during, and after. And the police department has a role to play that can be positive or negative. That's our role. How do we evaluate how the police department is involved in that role in creating a dynamic which is healthy for the police officers, healthy for and working in a healthy position with the Berkeley Health Department, and indirectly and directly, it is healthy to the members of the community in Berkeley. That's where we are. If that's the trigger, or how do we have conversations, and how do we create a conversation in which we can then offer options to City Council and to the police department and the chief on how that thing can be better, maybe. But I'm not really willing to sit down here. My sister has a master's degree in healthcare, and I tell you, it's a lot of work. I don't have the wherewithal, I don't have the jurisdiction, I don't have the directive, I don't have the understanding to dwell deeply into mental health. It's just not what I do. But I'm going to give.
Yeah, I was just going, I've been listening very, very closely. And I think a piece of this does belong with the Mental Health Commission, clearly. And that would include looking at models, not just in California or Alameda County, but looking at models internationally to see what works, how it works, who are the first responders, who gets there, who can, so I'll take that back to the commission, because we're looking at whole person care, we're looking at all kinds of different models that exist that we can get the best practices from, and then have the conversation with the department saying, are you willing to make some changes? And this could be part of our work, but I also believe that it does belong to you, because when the officers go out and de-escalate someone, that is providing mental health care. De-escalation in itself is providing mental health care. So they are providing mental health care services. That might just be the way I read it and I look at it after 50 years in the mental health field. But so that it does sit with you in the same way that us looking at what's the role of the police department in making sure that people that are having mental health episodes in the street are treated, and what role do they play in the care, is equal to you looking at the team and saying how do they respond in partnership with BPD. So it's very intertwined. And for me, it's hard to separate. So I just wanted to share that. But I'm also willing to share the responsibility as a commission and take it to the commission and say we want to look at something.
As a use of force, and how do you get the use of force to be less than what it is? Also, how do you create a situation in which is a positive dynamic with the person in which the police officer is involved in? So maybe the definition here is where we are a little bit in between. I think that if a police officer de-escalates an incident with a person in public, whatever that is, whether the person is violent, whether the person is in distress, whether the person is depressed, that interaction with a police officer can certainly affect their mental health. But it is not giving mental health care to the person. I mean, I can't, as a 25-year police oversight practitioner, equate those things as the same. I can't, because I cannot have the expectation of a police officer that performs the duties to offer mental health care. What I can do is for them to be sure to understand what mental health condition the person is, and to take the proper measures not to increase that level of stress and to de-escalate the level of stress so that it can be a more positive end result to their interaction.
I hear
which
you.
is less use of force.
But it is part of that continuum that happens from the moment that the police are called and Berkeley Mental Health is called. It's the piece of, at least the person who's the consumer, it's a piece of their experience. And it can be very traumatic or it can be very healing. So, you know, it's a little, I hear you.
I just want to make sure that we expect our police officers in an everyday basis to be engaging and giving mental health.
Oh, not at all, not at all.
But understanding that you are correct, that it is that interaction that can be possibly negatively create a dynamic with a person which can affect their mental health. And it is important for police officers to be cognizant of that interaction and how they treat someone, and to be able to read those telltale signs so that the use of force and the end result is positive, not a negative. My end result is to make sure police officers interact with someone in a manner in which use of force is less, in which the interaction is that everybody walks away with an understanding of what the next step is, in which lethal use of force is not used, which we know that it is both, it destroys communities, it destroys the person, and it also destroys the police officers' lives. So I want to make sure that that is all taken care. And then we have to talk about the mental health of the police officers as well. On the duress of dealing with people with mental health every single time. That's not part of the conversation, but it should be as well. Why cannot stress that we're doing police officers on a regular basis, dealing with someone in such a high level of distress? So are we talking about mental health care for police officers as well, and quality of life? There's all those discussions, and those are very, very important as it relates to the work that we do, but not mental health. Policy is much different. De-escalation, use of force, interaction with mental health people is what we need to use at the discussion, not a review of mental health.
I understand the catch committee too.
Just to be clear, I think you said it best. When you said that if officers are the first responders, you don't believe they're providing care. And I think that's the problem. So we don't have to call that care. But if they're responding to a situation where what really is needed is care, then that's a problem.
I understand. Could you make it clear?
In the model of the zoning adjustments board where we cross-pollinate across commissions, I would be glad to go anytime, Una, where you're looking at models, or internationally or locally, Marin or elsewhere, and to just be on the lookout for anything helpful to bring here. And I would be glad to do that. And maybe make motion now to close this item and move on.
Well, no, because it's item is Commissioner Pritchett's, and we have to have the due respect before it becomes an item of the commission. If we take an action, it becomes an item of the commission per our new rules. But so I need to know from Commissioner Pritchett, what does she see as a possible action item for us, if there is one?
The action item is that we commit to a presentation from alternative care providers who respond to emergency mental health crisis.
And that can easily be agendized on the agenda if you take the initiative.
That's all I want to do right now. I had slightly higher hopes. I also would like to invite individuals who have accessed the care system so that we can hear some firsthand stories about what their experience. Did they feel helped by the situation or did they not? anybody is welcome to invite anybody. I'm not trying to make it like a yes or no, us or them. I'm trying to really, let's surface some of the concerns that have been expressed to me, and I'd like to share them with you if folks, but those would be different meetings.
I would hate to do that in this forum. I can't think of
Maybe
a much traumatizing environment.
Commissioner, maybe a subcommittee is a better environment or something, but I do feel like airing the alternatives that are out there and hearing from other mental health professionals, no disrespect to the folks in the room, but it's a big world out there.
What you're not talking about is anything related to BPD policy.
It is what it is. Let me be clear that we have a current response to emergency mental health crisis that involves police and Berkeley mental health. So when I'm saying, are there alternatives to having a police response to some situations, then that is still, I think, well within our purview, well within our
So that was
mission.
discussed tonight, and the answer was no. Una suggested that there may be other models that we're not aware of, and that it would be appropriate for the Mental Health Commission to look, and I have volunteered to go participate, not to exclude anybody else who wants to do that, but I think that's.
Commissioner, are you saying that it's not, that our taking a look at the effectiveness of our police in the role that they have in emergency mental health response, it's a big role. If I see something going down the street, the emergency number takes me to the police. I mean, come on now, how is that not our purview?
I'm not saying it's not our purview, I'm saying that just taking a broad sweep and an amorphous thing is not constructive. That calling for data is not constructive. That having testimonial and having a room full of upset people is not constructive. And don't assume that just because we don't want to do that here, that it's not happening. This is a big part of my life too, as the adopted daughter of someone who runs a clinic in Berkeley, and I'm hearing stories all of the time. And I have to say that she is very grateful for the service that the BPD provides, and her biggest concern is that response times will lead to dangerous situations for the people she's trying to help. So don't assume that just because we don't want to have a production in this room, that there's no caring, that there's no investigation, that there's no knowledge. If you can find a way to be constructive about this, it isn't just expressing distrust or you don't like the reality of the situation. Nobody here likes the reality of the situation. Raise your hands if you think America's doing well with mental health care. Nobody thinks that, right?
So that's
no, we're not going to take a huge fishing thing, and we have to find a way to be constructive. So I propose one, and that's all.
Let me say this, Mr. Roberts, I really would like to confirm you.
I would see maybe entertaining some presentations, but I think since Andrew is proposing it, I think we should ask you to hone it down to something that we can focus on that is related to police activities and not just bring in people to testify in general about the state of the mental health in the city, because that's another commission.
Okay.
And if we can't do that, then I would say we wouldn't move it forward.
So if we were talking about inquiry, and the question is, what are best practices for police departments in responding to emergency mental health calls?
Do you have any information about that?
No. What I would do is I would ask some mental health organizations, I would ask some experts in the field, I would do some research and make some invitations and see if they'd be willing to come, or direct us to literature that we could read, but doing it with an idea that we also have to at some point ask the police for an evaluation. Somebody should be evaluating what's going on. Like, who does that?
So,
Who is saying?
Because I've heard enough, well, not enough of the negative thing. What I've heard on the streets is the Berkeley police is doing an excellent job with the mental health. I mean, the mental health people have sat here and also told us that they would feel unsafe, uncomfortable if they didn't have that relationship with the Berkeley police coming out first. So I don't see reinventing the wheel, and I don't see us trying to criticize what the Berkeley police has been doing all of these years, and I'm just not in agreement to going through this, bringing people in. If you wanna know about mental health, then maybe you need to talk to the mental health commissioners, but I don't see why we as a commission should have to reinvent the wheel as to what the Berkeley police is now doing in their relationship with the mental health.
So Commissioner Pitcher, it seems to me that there isn't a consensus on your item of the agenda. What I would say to recommend it, if you can hone it down, or
Help
make
with
it
the
less
honing
broad to
process.
say that you will look at other jurisdictions to make a presentation of how they deal with interaction with mental health services and police officer responses, and we can have that presentation from the Department of San Francisco or Oakland, or whatever it is, how they interact with police departments and their mental crisis responses. And we can take that information of the one given today and maybe make a recommendation to the Department of City Council how to make changes. That's the only way that I can see this moving forward.
Or at least decide if we want to hear it any further.
That's right.
Yeah.
But as it stands, this item on the agenda, I think you're seeing that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, I think is super.
I also want to say on any topic, housing, mental health, services, helping the community, every solution is incremental. Hard, long-term work and incremental. There's not going to be any big magic sweep that fixes this. It's going to be incremental improvement.
If we look for it. If we let
And people
ourselves look
are,
for
and
it.
I'm offering to engage in looking further.
So it seems
Just looking down the street instead of over here.
So is there a motion, is there any motion on the floor, or are we tabling this until it comes back to us in a manner that's more geared to our work? What's the,
I would like to make a motion to close the item. It may come back in some other form on someone's initiative, but I'd like to close the item.
I second.
Any motion in here?
close the item in its present form? It might come back in a different manner, but close the item in its present form.
I'd like to make a substitute motion. I'd like to propose that the commission, seek out best practices in, emergency mental health response in as much as the police role is concerned.
I just don't think seek out is the action item, Commissioner Bridger. It has to be more specific to the way that the commission works.
I just don't understand what you're talking about.
If the commissioner, an action item is not for the commission to seek out. The commission works on 3 different levels.
We can gather information, does that help?
Then that would have to be something that would be directed, for gathering information purposes, that would probably have to be directed to the PRC officer. If we're talking about a creation of an ad hoc subcommittee, a policy investigation,
I withdraw.
or a subcommittee,
I withdraw.
it just, we have to act the way that we act. So, are there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Abstentions? Nays?
Nay.
Nay. Basically, I'm going to postpone item 10 on the agenda, as well as item 10 on the agenda. I'd like to move to item 11D first, selection of commissioner to serve on City of Berkeley Division 0 Advisory Committee. Chris, can you give us this, because I know this is timely?
Yes, in fact, I got another email today saying they scheduled their first meeting for next Monday, the 29th, at 2:00. So, this is the Vision Zero Advisory Committee, page 37 of your packet. And I was contacted by the transportation planner
When are they meeting on the 29th?
It's 2 o'clock, 2 to 4 o'clock. At 1947 Center, 3rd floor.
We know this is a close thing to our heart because of not only traffic problems, but also the former commissioner was the victim of an end result of traffic lights and how to improve safety for the streets in Berkeley. Does anybody want to participate in this?
I wouldn't mind doing it because I have a major concern about my area and people running red lights, and it's horrible, you know. I've almost gotten hit several times.
Does anybody have any other interest in this? Does anybody have a concern of appointing a vice chair to be a representative of the PRC for this? No. So if there is no concerns or any problems with this, by consent, we can say that Commissioner Alavi will represent the PRC at the Division Zero Advisory Committee. If you didn't take it out, then I take it. No, you can.
Thanks, Gwen.
Thank you, Gwen. Ms. Lee, the next item for you is 11C, whether to have a temporary Juneteenth festival on Sunday, June 16th.
Again, just putting out feelers for people. You know, I think we need a critical mass of at least 3 commissioners who are willing to go. So far, Commissioner Nicotin has indicated she'd be willing to take on a shift. Is anybody else here interested? I will agendize it again for next meeting because we have 3 commissioners who aren't here.
So, do we want?
I never go, and I don't know how long but it's usually Father's Day.
Right.
And I have things that I do on that day.
It's
But I mean, I wouldn't mind helping out.
Okay. Well, I mean,
But I'd
we
like
have
to
one-
know what time.
Right, well, that would be the second step. If it looks like there's a critical mass, then there would be a conversation about.
It's a Wednesday, right?
Oh, it's Sunday.
Oh, June, never mind, sorry.
Father's Day.
Oh, sorry,
So,
my apologies.
once people have volunteered, if we have enough people who will volunteer, then we can talk about what time.
So this is a calls to arms, right? You're saying to say if people are want to attend, then we can get a table.
Well, we have to reserve a spot. So there's time for that. Okay. So you're number 2, and then I'll agendize it.
Are you gonna send a little poll?
No, I'm not doing it.
No, little poll, okay, that's great, got it.
Okay, so I've got 2 now. And I'll be asking again at the next meeting. Thank you,
So
Commissioner.
in the interest of time, Ms. Lee, we'll postpone 11B and 10, okay?
Yes.
10 old business and 11B until the next meeting.
Right.
Commissioner, can you do public comment for me?
Oh,
We'll move to public comment.
public comment? Okay.
Commissioners, thank you for this session tonight. I found it very informative. My name is Charles Clark. I reside in District 6. And what I found probably most useful was the insight that the interaction of police with mental health depends a heck of a lot on the resources available to mental health being increased. I have to say the number 4 mobile crisis team members to serve the city of Berkeley between the hours of 11:30 a.m. and 10 p.m. You know, mental crises are a 24-hour affair. So I have to say, in terms of what this commission can do, I'm going to be discouraging and say absolutely nothing, because as long as the resources for the mental health contact are not available, the police involvement is always going to be there. And furthermore, even if we get to that great day when we have sufficient mental health resources, they're still going to require as they say, top cover from the police department. So your role is going to be unavoidable, as it is appreciated by the people who were sitting here just now. So in that entire mix of facts, seeking out data and seeking out models is likely not to be a very productive exercise, because the key fact is that the service that is being rendered needs to be increased. The mental health resources need to be made available. So I have to say to our representative from the Mental Health Commission, that's the big payoff from tonight, I have to say. In terms of what the PRC can do, that's very relatively little, actually, because the major fact that comes through is the services to substitute, say, for the police just are not available right now. So I would say that, you know, given that situation, the police in their current state, at least to my observation, are performing about as well as can be expected. Because as we learn, the tree of events that generate these calls is very complicated. And so the data collection exercise might be a little tricky. But, you know, thinking and anecdotally myself, you know, walking on Shattuck and seeing a woman beating the window of Missing Link bike shop with a branch is disturbing enough. But then when I walk past 20 minutes later and I see that she is in handcuffs, not violent, but clearly something happened, and it turns out that that branch was wielded against a person. You know, that's Berkeley we live in. Or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. That is a Berkeley that we live in. That is a subset of problems that the police are indispensable to address. They don't need to be addressing every problem, but they do need to be there. So I think that's where I've been left. You know, I appreciate what I see BPD doing. I would say that, you know, seeking out information would be fine, but as a citizen, I would say the mental health resources would be the thing, the place to start.
More public comment.
Please.
As I just advised one of the commissioners when I was speaking on the crisis triage, that's SB 82 monies, that there was substantial monies for the Oversight and Accountability Commission for various resources. Some of them the city could have applied to, some of them was partnering with the county, and for the most part, the mental health division here did not apply. They did apply for the crisis triage monies, actually pressured to apply for them and did. And I'm really disappointed that those haven't already been implemented, because they should have been implemented. I want to say, as far as a resource, and this is about law enforcement, CIT International is the best resource to look towards, and I've attended 3 of their conferences in different parts of the country. They're wonderful workshops that they put on. It's primarily law enforcement that attends them, although they are open. They're open to other persons attending them also, and they're being very informative. And actually, the officers do learn some of the things that you would consider clinical, like how to interact with someone with autism, how to recognize certain behaviors, how to, again, the emphasis is basically de-escalation. But you also learn to do things like, there are 10 workshops at every juncture that they hold. And some of those workshops will be on something like hearing how someone hears voices. And so there actually is an incredible amount of information there. There's a lot of information how different departments interact with clinicians. There was, or have someone working with them either cooperatively or in a triage type setting. There was one officer who said he stands in the background for the most part. I'm trying to remember if that's someplace in in Pennsylvania. He said he would not go out to a domestic relations situation, a domestic violence situation, without bringing a mental health person with him. And that's what's going on in this community. I think the police actually do an excellent job here. Really admirable job interacting with people, but they're not supposed to be mental health clinicians. They're supposed to be law enforcement. And that department, I remember him speaking, like I said, that he would not go out to a domestic violence situation. They would not go into a hostage situation without someone trained with him in mental health, and that they work together cooperatively in that way. What happens in Berkeley is the police are often the first person on the scene, and they're doing a good job. And they're often the only people on the scene because they cover more hours, and the mobile crisis is pulled in different directions. I think that thing about calling 911 repeatedly was really interesting, because you need a crisis line that people know of, that they can be calling 24 hours. The resources need to be out there. As I mentioned when I came in, there's a really high suicide attempted threat rate here. Is this really something that the police should be doing 1/3 of their time in? And there is, the mental health system here is actually fairly well funded, because you have various sources of funding from the state, for example, through the MHSA. But I definitely recommend looking at Crisis Intervention International. Oh, I do want to say something about Marin. I was horrified to hear someone say Marin was a model. I don't know what's going on now, but I've also attended a couple of California crisis intervention conferences, which I did not find anywhere near the caliber of the national ones. The national ones are great, international ones. And regarding Marin, there was actually someone in charge of their CIT who got up and said that the most important thing was to get people into treatment, and you do that by arresting them. And I talked to him and I said, under what do you arrest them? He said, anything you can get them, just charge them with anything. You don't have to continue to pursue it, but just charge them with anything so you can get them into the system. And I just found that, that came from Marin. I was just horrified to hear that Marin being talked about as a model. I would say Berkeley is a much better model than Marin if you want to look towards the law enforcement. They're much better here, their philosophy of de-escalation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the topic?
I wasn't gonna speak because I have a sore throat, but I wanted to commend Berkeley PD. Again, I knew that situation that happened last week sometime, where there was a disturbed female, and she was going in and out of traffic, and she left furniture in the way of traffic, and she also had a branch. For some reason, this is a common thing. And Berkeley PD responded very quickly, and they were quick to stop the threat of her possibly getting run over by a car. They put their lives at stake, right in front of everybody. This happened right in front of me in the road, okay? So they eliminated the threat right away, themselves and others, and I wanted to commend you. I really, it's important for me to know that the Berkeley PD cares, and that reaffirms that notion, and so I think you need to hear that, and the community knows and the community sees. These are very difficult issues that we're dealing with, and in an ideal world, everybody would get the health care they need, the housing they need, the services, everything, but that isn't the case, and it's a trying situation for everybody, and I appreciate all of everybody's help. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there's no further public comment, we are going to adjourn to closed session.